to meet their own rooted 6,000 more. Of course, I'd be very happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss this issue further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Times Higher Education have reported that several UK universities are providing Afghan evening scholars with considerable financial assistance, from food vouchers to laptops. Whilst this is to be commended, it is shocking that the financial contributions of the UK government is not covering what they need. So what discussions has the Minister had with colleagues within FCDO to increase the financial contribution to properly support these Afghan students?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the contribution that universities are also making to Afghan refugees, and I will meet with the Honourable Member to detail exactly what the government has done to support those studying here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister join me in thanking the head teacher and the staff of Ivor Valley School in my constituency? They're in discussions for a much-needed refurbishment. And can the Minister advise me, what is the government's plan for upgrading the estate of schools that deal with children with severe learning difficulties?
Minister. Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. He knows I recently visited an excellent alternative provision setting with him, the Academy for Central Bedfordshire. He will know we are investing an extra £2.6 billion between 2022 and 2025 to deliver an additional 30,000 places and improve existing provision for children with SEND. And of course, I would echo his thanks.
Schools in East Hull have gone above and beyond to ensure that kids have kept learning during the pandemic. And I thank each and every school leader, teacher and support staff for that. But they've been badly let down by this government. 10,600 school days were lost last term as a result of this government's failure. So when will the Minister adopt the ambitious, comprehensive school recovery plan put forward by the Shadow Secretary of State, which will, in fact, do what needs to be done?
Say to the honourable gentleman, but we have a strong plan for recovery in schools. We have a strong plan for attendance, and it's absolutely vital that we make sure, because there has been unavoidable absence as a result of COVID, we make sure we crack down on the avoidable absence, which was a reason for one of my visits to the North East just last week.
Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Stoke-on-Trent, we're proud to be the home of Staffordshire University, but sadly it seems the cancel culture has arrived on our doorsteps after the wokerati made formal complaints about criminology professor James Treadwell for tweeting that transgender women should not be allowed in women's prisons after citing research that found that half of women in prison have experienced emotional, physical or sexual abuse. Will my honourable friend share with me her despair at this tiny extreme minority who wish to silence anyone whose opinion they disagree with? And will my honourable friend join me in lending their support to Professor Treadwell?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that is committed to ensuring free speech on our campuses, which is exactly why we are honouring our manifesto commitment and bringing to the House free speech legislation. I would like to point out that the University of Sussex is already being investigated by the Office for Students, and other universities should take note of this.
Thank you, Voxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Research published by the Social Market Foundation has shown that students accepted to university from working class backgrounds are more likely to hold a BTEC qualification than their peers. After failing my GCSEs as a working class 16-year-old, it was our BTEC in performing arts that got me back into education and ultimately into university. Now, the Minister's already been asked this question by the Honourable Member for Westminster North. Does the Minister agree that the decision to hastily remove BTEC funding makes a mockery of the government's claims to be levelling up in education?
The Honourable Lady will have heard my Honourable friend, the Secretary of State, extend the timescale for T-levels during the second reading of the Skills Bill. T-levels, I'm sure that the Honourable Lady herself would have benefited from being able to do a T-level when she was at school. It would have given her 9 weeks of work placement. She'd have done a qualification that was designed with employers, and it would have led to a job in the economy.
Dr. Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that Section 406(1)(b) of the 1996 Education Act already outlaws, quotes, the promotion of partisan political views in the teaching of any subject in the school, will the government, without further delay, take appropriate action against Brighton and Hove City Council, which is planning to indoctrinate 7-year-olds with critical race theory?
Minister. Well, my honourable friend, the Minister for Equalities, have been very clear that critical race theory should never be taught as that. It is a contentious political viewpoint, and we are absolutely working on making sure we update our guidance on political impartiality for schools to make that absolutely clear.
Mr. Speaker, Upton High in my constituency is rated good with an outstanding sixth form, but it keeps getting overlooked for replacement of its 1960s prefab buildings, which are falling apart. When is the government going to announce the new guidelines, and will they look kindly on Upton High's application?
I know the honourable gentleman recently met with my noble friend, the Minister for the School System, and discussed the case for this school. Cheshire West and Chester Council received 4.6 million in school condition allocations this financial year. Our school rebuilding programme will deliver 500 projects over the next decade, transforming education for thousands of pupils, and he has made his case once again.
Ben Bradley.
Speaker, I welcome the government's entitlement to lifelong learning and commitment to level 3 qualifications, but my honourable friend, the Skills Minister, will know many residents around the country will need significant help with levels 1 and 2 in order to be able to access that offer. Will you meet with representatives of West Ox College and myself to discuss how we might be able to offer that support to people in Mansfield?
Minister.
I'd be delighted to meet with my honourable friend. We are reforming level 2 qualifications, and obviously the Chancellor announced our plans for Multiply, a new project to help people with numeracy of all ages.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Primary schools and secondary schools alike are telling me that the biggest challenge they face is COVID-related staff absence, anywhere between 15 and 20% of school staff missing. Can the Minister confirm how many volunteers have signed up to the teacher volunteer drive, and what are we doing to keep teachers in schools so that we can keep them safe?
Minister.
Of course, the government's guidelines and guidance around COVID are very much about keeping both staff and pupils safe. But with regard to the point you raised about volunteers, we published figures at the beginning of January which showed that at that point, the responses from about a quarter of the supply agencies show that 585 teachers had come forward in answer to that call to arms. We expect the full number to be significantly higher.
Into the latest Ofsted inspection ratings, only 55% of Derbyshire secondary schools are rated good or better, compared to a national benchmark of 80%. If levelling up is going to mean anything, it must be about fixing this glaring educational inequality. Will the Minister agree to meet with me and fellow Derbyshire MPs to discuss how we can improve educational standards and opportunity for all in Derbyshire?
Minister. Certainly be happy to do that.
Neil Coyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chatty Mums Network of Bermondsey and Rotherhithe recently met with me to raise concerns about cost of living and the lack of affordable childcare. So what assessment have ministers made of the impact of cuts to universal credit and the new Tory tax on working mums from April?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there is a substantial offer in place to support parents with childcare costs. In 2021, 328,700 children had a government-funded early education entitlement place for 30 hours worth up to £6,000.
Tim Moulton.
Mr. Speaker, before Christmas, the Secretary of State made a statement about the tragic deaths of Arthur Lavinia Hughes and Star Hobson. To that grisly list has now been added Amina Faye Johnson. He announced a review by the Serious Case Review National Panel. When will that review be published, and can he assure us that it will be published in full?
Ashley John Baptiste shared his personal story in the BBC documentary Split Up in Care, Life Without Siblings. His story is not unusual, nor is it a past feature of our care system. Thousands of children removed from their families, alone and scared, are denied relationships with their siblings. Despite all of the evidence shown, this relationship and bond is one of the most significant and enduring. So why is it this government stubbornly refuses to make changes to the Children Act and give sibling contact with
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would like to make a statement. And first, I want to express my deepest gratitude to Sue Gray and all the people who have contributed to this report, which I have placed in the library of this House and which the government has published in full today for everyone to read. I will address its findings in this statement, but firstly, I want to say sorry. And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled. And it's no use saying that this or that was within the rules, and it's no use saying that people were working hard. This pandemic was hard for everyone. We asked people across this country to make the most extraordinary sacrifices, not to meet loved ones, not to visit relatives before they died. And I understand the anger that people feel. But, Mr. Speaker, it isn't enough to say sorry. This is a moment when we must look at ourselves in the mirror and we must learn. And while the Metropolitan Police must yet complete their investigation, and that means there are no details of specific events in Sue Gray's report, I, of course, accept Sue Gray's general findings in full. And above all, her recommendation that we must learn from these events and act now. With respect to the events under police investigation, she says, and I quote, "No conclusions should be drawn or inferences made from this other than it is now for the police to consider the relevant material in relation to those incidents." But more broadly, she finds that there is significant learning to be drawn from these events, which must be addressed immediately across government. This does not need to wait for the police investigations to be concluded. That is why we are making changes now to the way Downing Street and the Cabinet Office run, so that we can get on with the job that I was elected to do, Mr. Speaker, and the job that this government was elected to do. First, it is time to sort out what Sue Gray rightly calls the fragmented and complicated leadership structures of Downing Street, which she says have not evolved sufficiently to meet the demands of the expansion of Number 10. And we will do that, including by creating an office of the Prime Minister with a permanent secretary to lead Number 10. Second, Mr. Speaker, it is clear from Sue Gray's report that it is time not just to review the Civil Service and Special Advisor codes of conduct wherever necessary, to ensure that they take account of Sue Gray's recommendations, but also to make sure that those codes are properly enforced. And third, I will be saying more in the coming days about the steps we will take to improve the Number 10 operation and the work of the Cabinet Office, to strengthen Cabinet government, and to improve the vital connection between Number 10 and Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I get it and I will fix it. And I want to say, to the people of this country, I know what the issue is. Yes, Mr. Speaker, yes. It's whether this government can be trusted to deliver. And I say, Mr. Speaker, yes, we can be trusted. Yes, we can be trusted to deliver. We said that we would get Brexit done, Mr. Speaker, and we did. And we're setting up free ports around the whole United Kingdom. I've been to one of them today, which is creating tens of thousands of new jobs, Mr. Speaker. We said we would get this country through COVID, and we did. We delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe and the fastest booster program of any major economy, so that we've been able to restore people's freedoms faster than any comparable economy. And at the same time, we've been cutting crime by 14%, building 40 new hospitals, and rolling out gigabit broadband, Mr. Speaker, and delivering all the promises of our 2019 agenda, so that we have the fastest economic growth of the G7. We have shown that we have done things that people thought were impossible, Mr. Speaker, and that we can deliver for the British people. Mr. Speaker, I remind the benches opposite. The reason we're coming out of COVID so fast is at least partly because we doubled the speed of the booster rollout. And I can tell the House and this country that we are going to bring the same energy and commitment to getting on with the job, to delivering for the British people, and to our mission to unite and level up across this country, Mr. Speaker, and I commend this statement to the House.
I now call Keir Starmer the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank Sue Gray for the diligence and professionalism with which she's carried out her work. It's no fault of hers that she's only been able to produce an update today, not the full report. The Prime Minister repeatedly assured the House that the guidance was followed and the rules were followed. But we now know that 12 cases have reached the threshold for criminal investigation, which I remind the House means that there is evidence of serious and flagrant breaches of lockdown, including the party on the 20th of May 2020, which we know the Prime Minister attended, and the party on the 13th of November 2020 in the Prime Minister's flat. There can be no doubt that the Prime Minister himself is now subject to criminal investigation. The Prime Minister must keep his promise to publish Sue Gray's report in full when it is available. But it is already clear that the report discloses the most damning conclusion possible. Over the last 2 years, the British public have been asked to make the most heart-wrenching sacrifices. A collective trauma, endured by all, enjoyed by none. Funerals have been missed, dying relatives unvisited. Every family has been marked by what we've been through. And revelations about the Prime Minister's behaviour have forced us all to rethink and relive those darkest moments. Many have been overcome by rage, by grief, and even guilt. Guilt that because they stuck to the law, they did not see their parents one last time. Guilt that because they didn't bend the rules, their children went months without seeing friends. Guilt that because they did as they were asked, they didn't go and visit lonely relatives. But people shouldn't feel guilty. They should feel pride in themselves and their country, because by abiding by those rules, they've saved the lives of people they will probably never meet. They have shown the deep public spirit and the love and respect for others that has always characterised this nation at its best. Our national story about COVID is one of a people that stood up when they were tested. But that will be forever tainted by the behaviour of this Conservative Prime Minister. By routinely breaking the rules he set, the Prime Minister took us all for fools. He held people sacrificing contempt. He showed himself unfit for office. His desperate denials since he was exposed have only made matters worse. Rather than come clean, every step of the way, he's insulted the public's intelligence. And now he's finally fallen back on his usual excuse. It's everybody's fault but his. They go, he stays. Even now, he is hiding behind a police investigation into criminality, into his home and his office. Mr. Speaker, he gleefully treats what should be a mark of shame as a welcome shield. But, Prime Minister, the British public aren't fools. They never believed a word of it. They think the Prime Minister should do the decent thing and resign. Of course he won't, because he is a man without shame. And just as he has done throughout his life, he's damaged everyone and everything around him along the way. His colleagues have spent weeks defending the indefensible, touring the TV studios, parroting his absurd denials, degrading themselves and their offices, fraying the bond of trust between the government.
Oh, the member for South Ribble is my neighbour. I expect better from my neighbours. Keir Starmer.
Fraying the bond of trust between the government and the public, eroding our democracy and the rule of law. Margaret Thatcher once said, "The first duty of government is to uphold the law. If it tries to bob and weave and duck around that duty when it's inconvenient, then so will the governed." Mr. Speaker, to govern this country is an honour, not a birthright. It is an act of service to the British people, not the keys to a court to parade to your friends. It requires honesty, integrity, and moral authority. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me that this Prime Minister's lack of integrity is somehow priced in, that his behaviour and character don't matter. I have never accepted that, and I never will accept that. Whatever your politics, whichever party you vote for, honesty and decency matters. Our great democracy depends on it, and cherishing and nurturing British democracy is what it means to be patriotic. There are members opposite who know that, and they know the Prime Minister is incapable of it. The question they must now ask themselves is, what are they going to do about it? They can heap their reputations, the reputation of their party, the reputation of this country on the bonfire that is his leadership, or they can spare the country from a Prime Minister totally unworthy of his responsibilities. It is their duty to do so. They know better than anyone how unsuitable he is for high office. Many of them knew in their hearts that we would inevitably come to this one day. And they know that as night follows day, continuing his leadership will mean further misconduct, cover-up and deceit. It is only they that can end this farce. The eyes of the country are upon them. They will be judged by the decisions they take now.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's a reason why he said absolutely nothing about the report that was presented by this government and later put in the library of the House earlier on today. That is because, Mr. Speaker, the report does absolutely nothing to substantiate the tissue of nonsense he has just spoken. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Instead, Mr. Speaker, this leader of the opposition, a former Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out, Mr. Speaker. He, Mr. Speaker, chose to use this moment. He used this moment, Mr. Speaker, continually to prejudge a police inquiry. That's what he chose to do. He's reached his conclusions about it. I'm not going to reach any conclusions, and he would be entirely wrong to do so. And I direct him again, Mr. Speaker, to what Sue Gray says in her report about the conclusions that can be drawn from her inquiry about what the police may or may not do. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have complete confidence in the police, and I hope that they will be allowed simply to get on with their job. And I don't propose to offer any more commentary about it, and I don't believe that he should either. And I must say to him that what I think the country, with greatest respect to the benches opposite, what I think the country wants us all in this House to focus on is the issues that matter to them. And getting on, Mr. Speaker, with taking this country forward. And Mr. Speaker, today we have delivered yet more Brexit freedoms with a new Freeport in Tilbury, as I said, when he voted 48 times to take this country back into the EU. Mr. Speaker, we have the most open society, most open economy. Mr. Speaker, this is, I think, what people want us to focus on. We have the most open society, most open economy in Europe because of the vaccine rollout, because of the booster rollout. And never forget, Mr. Speaker, that he voted to keep us in the European Medicines Agency, which would have made that impossible. And today, Mr. Speaker, we are standing together with our NATO allies against the potential aggression of Vladimir Putin, when he wanted, not so long ago, to install a Prime Minister, a Labour leader who would actually have abolished NATO, Mr. Speaker. That's what he believes in. Those are his priorities. Well, I can say to him, he can continue with his political opportunism. We are going to get on, and I am going to get on with the job.
quiet. Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The COVID regulations impose significant restrictions on the freedoms of members of the public. They had a right to expect their Prime Minister to have read the rules, to understand the meaning of the rules, and indeed those around him to have done so too, and to set an example in following those rules. What the Gray report does show is that number 10 Downing Street was not observing the regulations they had imposed on members of the public. So either my right honourable friend had not read the rules, or didn't understand what they meant, and others around him, or they didn't think the rules applied to number 10. Which was it?
My right honourable friend.
It's a very important question. I want to hear the answer, even if other people don't. Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, that is not what the Gray report says. It is not what the Gray report says. But if she, I suggest that she wait to see the conclusion of the inquiry.
I now come to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say it's a pleasure to follow the former Prime Minister, and perhaps her behaviour in office, like many that went before her, was about dignity, about the importance of the office, of respect, of truthfulness. And the Prime Minister will be well advised to focus on those that have not dishonoured the office like he has done. Mr. Speaker, we stand here today faced with the systematic decimation of public trust in government and the institutions of the state, and at its heart, a Prime Minister being investigated by the police. So here we have it, the long-awaited Sue Gray report. What a farce. It was carefully engineered to be a fact-finding exercise with no conclusions. Now we find it's a fact-finding exercise with no facts. So let's talk facts. The Prime Minister has told the House that all guidance was completely followed. There was no party. COVID rules were followed and that. I believed it was a work event. Nobody believed them then. And nobody believes you now, Prime Minister. That is the crux. No ifs, no buts. He has willfully misled Parliament. It's bad enough.
Order! Inadvertent misled the House would be acceptable. Misled the House is not acceptable. Withdraw inadvertent.
The Prime Minister inadvertently told the House on the 8th of December that no parties had taken place and then had to admit that they had. It's bad enough, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister's personal integrity is in the ditch, but this murky business is tainting everything around it. It is our intention to submit a motion instructing the Prime Minister to publish the Gray report in full. Will the Prime Minister obey an instruction by this House to publish as required? Mr. Speaker, amidst allegations of blackmail by Tory whips, the members opposite have been defending the indefensible. Wait for the report, we were told. Well, here it is, and it tells us very little, except it does state that there were failures of leadership and judgment by different parts of number 10. It states that some events should not have been allowed to take place. That is the Prime Minister's responsibility. If there is any honour in public life, then he would resign. Where is this? And he laughs. And the Prime Minister laughs. We ought to remind ourselves in this House that 150,000 plus of our citizens have lost their lives. Family members that couldn't be with them. And that is the sight that people will remember. A Prime Minister laughing at our public. I extend the hand of friendship to all those that have sacrificed. I certainly do not extend the hand of friendship to the Prime Minister, who is no friend of mine. Where is the shame? Where is the dignity? Meanwhile, The police investigation will drag on and on. Every moment the Prime Minister stays, trust in government and the rule of law is ebbing away. The litany of rule breaking, the culture of contempt, the utter disdain for the anguish felt by the public who have sacrificed so much. What the public see is a man who has debased the office of Prime Minister, shrinked responsibility, dogged accountability, and blamed his staff at every turn, presided over sleaze and corruption, and tainted the very institutions of the state. In short, Mr. Speaker, this is a man. Well, they can laugh, but the public know. The public know this is a man they can no longer trust. He has been investigated by the police. He misled the House. He must now resign.
Order. You'll have to withdraw that last comment.
Mr. Speaker, I gave the evidence of the 8th of December.
Order. You're going to have to withdraw misled.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has misled the House.
Unless you withdraw, I will have to stop, and that's not good. Just withdraw the words.
I am standing up for my constituents that know that this Prime Minister has lied and misled the House.
Give me the paper. Give me the paper. Inadvertently misled. I'll give you one more chance. As leader of the SNP, I don't want to have to throw you out. I'm going to give you this chance. Please.
Please to power. That man has misled the House.
Shut up. I'm sorry it's come to this, and I'm sorry that the leader of the party has not got the decency to just withdraw those words in order that this debate can be represented by all political leaders. Would you like to inadvertently?
If the Prime Minister has inadvertently misled the House, then I will state that.
Right, we're going to leave it at that. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for withdrawing what he just said, because he was wrong then, and he, I'm afraid, is wrong in his analysis. And I apologise, as I've said, for all the suffering that people have had throughout this pandemic, and for the anger that people feel about what has taken place in number 10 Downing Street. But I've got to tell the right honourable gentleman that for much of what he said, his best course is simply to wait for the inquiry to be completed.
Can I just say, I take it the honourable member has withdrawn it, the right honourable member.
That the Prime Minister may have inadvertently misled the House.
But, order. To help me, to help the House, you withdrawn your earlier comment and replaced it with inadvertently.
It's not my fault if the Prime Minister can't be trusted to tell the truth.
Under the power given to me by Standing Order number 43, I order the honourable member to withdraw immediately from the House. From the House. It's all right, we don't need to bother. Right, let us move on. Andrew Mitchell.
Does my right honourable friend recall that ever since he joined the party's candidates list 30 years ago, until we got him into number 10, he has enjoyed my full-throated support? But I'm deeply concerned by these events, and very concerned indeed by some of the things he has said from that dispatch box and has said to the British public and our constituents. When he kindly invited me to see him 10 days ago, I told him that I thought he should think very carefully about what was now in the best interests of our country and of the Conservative Party. And I have to tell him he no longer enjoys my support.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I must tell respectfully my right honourable friend, great though the admiration is that I have of him, I simply think that he's mistaken in his views, and I urge him to reconsider upon full consideration of the inquiry.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister told us, and I'm quoting him, I have repeatedly been assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken. We now know that 12 of the 16 parties are subject to a police investigation, and that of the remaining 4, the Sue Gray report says that she's seen a serious failure to observe the high standards at number 10. She's seen failures of leadership, failures of judgment, and the Prime Minister thinks this is fine. So just how bad do things have to be before he takes personal responsibility, does what everybody in this country wants him to do, and resign?
Mr. Speaker, what we are doing is taking the action that I've described to set up a Prime Minister's department to improve the operation of number 10, and we will be taking further steps, Mr. Speaker, in the days ahead.
Graham Stewart.
Speaker, the inquiry has found there have been serious failings and has suggested there be changes in the way that number 10 is run, and there's a real opportunity now to take forward this new office of the Prime Minister and ensure further improvements are made so that we can carry on delivering, because what the parties opposite hate is the fact that this government will carry on delivering on the things that matter most to people, while also making sure that the governance within number 10 is improved.
I thank my right honourable friend very, very much. I think he's completely right. I do think that the opposition, of course, want to keep their focus trained on this. That's their decision. I think, Mr. Speaker, what the people of this country want us to do is to get on with the job that they want us to do, and that is to serve them, Mr. Speaker, and to stop talking, frankly, about ourselves.
Mr. Speaker, there is no word in the English language for a parent who has lost a child. No equivalent of widow or orphan for that particular horror. It is a loss that is literally beyond words. A loss that hundreds and thousands of parents have tragically experienced during this pandemic. Many had to bury their children alone. Many couldn't be there with them at the end. Meanwhile, number 10 parted. Does the Prime Minister understand? Does he care about the enormous hurt his actions have caused to bereaved families across our country? Will he finally accept that the only decent thing that he can do now is to resign?
Mr. Speaker, I do care deeply about the hurt that is felt across the country about the suggestion that things were going on in number 10 that were in contravention of the COVID rules. And I understand how deeply people feel about this and how angry that they are. And I've apologised several times, Mr. Speaker, but I must say that I think we should wait for the outcome of the inquiry before jumping to the conclusions that he has. And in the meantime, we should focus on the issues that matter to the British people.
Caroline Notes.
Speaker, the public and this House have been frustrated by having to wait for Sue Gray, wait for the Metropolitan Police, and today the Prime Minister has announced his new office at number 10. Please can he let this House know what specific structures are going to be put in place so that this House can hold it accountable?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we will make sure that there's a new permanent secretary who will be accountable to me, and we will make sure that the codes of conduct that are applied both to SPADs and to civil servants are properly enforced. And of course, all of that will be properly communicated to the House, Mr. Speaker. And what I want to see is much better communication and links between number 10 and the entirety of the House of Commons, and we will do that.
Sir George Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, at the local Tesco store in my constituency, a constituent asked me, and it was in a tone more in sorrow than in anger, why doesn't the Prime Minister realise that as every day goes by, he damages the reputation of our country and abroad and around the world? Why, he said, doesn't the Prime Minister realise that? How would he respond to that constituent?
Mr. Speaker, I think the reputation of our country around the world is built on the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, in all major economies. It is built on having the fastest growth, therefore, in the G7. and it is built on our ability to bring our allies together to stand up against Vladimir Putin. That is what the world is focused on. That is what I'm focused on, and that, frankly, is what he should be focused on.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend first of all remind the leader of the opposition and the Labour Party that the backbenchers of the Conservative Party need no reminders about how to dispose of a failing leader? And can he also, when he is restructuring number 10, concentrate on the fact that the country wants results? The country, we can't see the point of such a large number 10 superstructure, that it needs to be slimmed down and streamlined. And can I commend his determination to restore cabinet government, and it is on results over the next few months on which he will be judged.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend very much for that, and I think he's entirely right, and I'm more than content to be judged, Mr. Speaker, on the results that we've already delivered and the results that we will deliver. I'm sure that we will be greatly assisted by the reforms of number 10 that I've outlined.
Diane Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anybody who's actually read the Sue Gray report can only wonder what she was made to leave out. Will the Prime Minister give the House an undertaking that as soon as he is able, he will release the full, unredacted report to this House?
Mr. Speaker, Sue Gray has published everything that she can, and I propose that we wait until the conclusion of the inquiry. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, I think it's peculiar that the report is being simultaneously hailed as utterly damning, but also condemned for not having enough in it. Mr. Speaker, it can't be both.
Vital Fabricant.
President Truman had on his desk, "The buck stops here." So the Prime Minister was right to apologise for the events that happened in number 10 Downing Street. 2 weeks ago, I reminded Tom Harwood that Tony Blair suggested that there should be an Office of Prime Minister so that it could be governed not from 70 Whitehall, but from the building itself. Could the Prime Minister tell me how he envisions the office will work? Will the Permanent Secretary be based in number 10, controlling what civil servants do in number 10?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, very grateful. I think the House does understand, even if many people outside don't, that number 10 actually hosts about more than 400 officials on a busy day. They have a huge amount to do, and we need to make sure, no, Mr. Speaker, they're working very hard. That's what they're doing. And we need to make sure that there are proper lines of authority and that we sort out the command structures, and that's what we're doing.
Oh, Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whatever the police decide, this update, severely limited as it is, would be enough to persuade any other Prime Minister to resign. This Prime Minister could resign and salvage for himself a crumb or two of honour, or he may try to delay and take his party down with him. So, Mr. Speaker, is it not clear that, with notable exceptions, his backbenchers should discover their backbones and sack him?
Look, Mr. Speaker, I've answered several questions like that, and I must really ask him to look at the report properly and also to wait for the inquiry when it comes.
Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've been asked to keep some sense of perspective, and I think that's right. The question here is whether those who make the law obey the law. That's pretty fundamental. Many have questioned, including some of my constituents, the Prime Minister's honesty and integrity and fitness to hold that office. Now, in judging him, he rightly asked us to wait for all the facts. Sue Gray has made it clear in her update today that she couldn't produce a meaningful report with the facts. So can I ask the Prime Minister the question that the Honourable Lady the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington asked him, and to which he didn't give an answer. When Sue Gray produces all of the facts in her full report after the police investigation, will he commit to publish it immediately and in full?
Mr. Speaker, what we've got to do, Sue Gray, is wait for the police to conclude their inquiries, Mr. Speaker. That is the proper thing to do. People have given all sorts of evidence in the expectation that it would not necessarily be published, Mr. Speaker. At that stage, I will take a decision about what to publish, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I imagine that I'm going to be asked to wait for something else. But can I just simply ask the Prime Minister, was the Prime Minister present at the event in his flat on the 13th of November? I assume he doesn't need other people to tell him whether he was there or not. Was he at the flat event listed in the report on the 13th of November?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the honourable lady for inviting me to comment on something that is being investigated. But with great respect to her, I am simply not going to indulge in running commentary. She will have to wait, Mr. Speaker.
Sir Robert Butland. Mr. Speaker, saying sorry is very important, but my right honourable friend will be judged by the deeds that he undertakes as a result. I heard today a proper acknowledgement that he needs to look in the mirror. And I'm glad to hear about reforms to the centre of government that I think are timely. In fact, they're overdue, as he knows from previous conversations I've had with him. But will he give me and the House this undertaking today, that in cooperating with the Metropolitan Police inquiry, he will show the appropriate tone and approach that I think the British public demand of him as a person of serious purpose who is up to the level of events. That's what we expect from him now, and that's what I'll be expecting him to do.
I thank my right honourable friend very much, and I just want to stress, Mr. Speaker, that I have great admiration for the Metropolitan Police and full confidence in the police. And I just suggest that they be allowed now to get on with their job.
Carl Turner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We now know that there's a criminal investigation into the party that took place on the 13th of November 2020 in his flat to celebrate the exit of Mr. Cummings. On the 8th of December last year, he came to that dispatch box and flatly denied the very idea that any such party had taken place. He's shaking his head in answer to my honourable friend, the member for Hornsey and Wood Green. He said it had not happened. Yeah. Now, is inadvertently, Mr. Speaker, misled the House. So the very least he should do is get to that dispatch box and correct the record.
No, Mr. Speaker, I stand by what I said, and I would simply urge him to wait for the outcome of the inquiry. That's what he needs to do.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I advise my right honourable friend publicly what I have said to emissaries from his campaign team privately, that it is truly in his interest, in the government's interest, and in the national interest that he should insist on receiving the full unredacted report immediately, as I believe he can, and that he should then publish the uncensored version without any further delay.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, but I think extensive legal advice has been taken on this point, and Sue Gray has published everything that she thinks she can that is consistent with that advice.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the police investigation were to result in serious criminal charges, necessitating a criminal trial such as
I don't know, for example, misconduct in public office or conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, how would the Prime Minister feel about having to give evidence on oath?
I'm not going to speculate about hypothetical questions which frankly I reject.
Mark Pritchard. Mr. Speaker, you will know that it's a very rare event for any Prime Minister to come to this House and apologise. A difficult thing for any Prime Minister to do. But on the issue of the police investigation, does my right honourable friend agree with me that there should be due process, that there should be free and unfettered access to all at number 10, but most of all, there should be no prejudging or undermining of the police inquiry before it's concluded?
Yes, I completely agree, and I must say I'm shocked by some of the commentary that I've heard from the benches opposite about that matter today, Mr. Speaker.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The thing is, this is who the Prime Minister is. A serious failure to observe high standards, failures of leadership and judgment, excessive consumption of alcohol in a professional workplace, gatherings that should not have been able to take place, staff too frightened to raise concerns, parties in his own private flat. A leopard doesn't change its spots, does it? Every single one who defends this will face this again and again and again, because he still won't even admit to the House that when he came to us on the 13th of November and said the guidance and the rules were followed at all times, and on the 1st of December that all the guidelines were observed, that those things simply were not true. If he won't correct the record today, there's nothing accidental about this, is there? It's deliberate.
I don't know what he's trying to say, Mr. Speaker, but look, I direct him again to the point made by Sue Gray that no conclusions should be drawn or inferences made from this, other than it is now time for the police to consider the relevant material. And that is what the House should allow them, frankly, to do.
Speaker, it is absolutely right that over the past few weeks, our constituents across the House have been writing to us on this hugely important issue. And I don't in any way wish to minimize its importance. But in my constituency, I have military bases. And I am receiving emails from families who are concerned about their loved ones and the potential role they may end up playing given the conflict on the Russian-Ukrainian border. Members opposite may treat this lightly, but for the families who have those serving in the military do not treat it lightly. Would my right honourable friend give me an assurance that, notwithstanding the importance of the issue that we are discussing at present, his government will start addressing other important matters that concern my constituents and the constituents of people across this House?
Thank him very much indeed, and I think he's completely right. Of course, these matters are important. We've got to wait for the inquiry, but in the meantime, the UK has got to play the leading role that we are, Mr. Speaker, in bringing the West together to make a united front against Vladimir Putin, particularly with the economic sanctions that we need, Mr. Speaker. That is the priority of the government right now.
Colin Eastwood. Mr. Speaker, while the Prime Minister was eating birthday cake with his pals, people were standing outside nursing home windows looking in at their loved ones dying. And contrary to what the Prime Minister has said from that very dispatch box multiple times, any objective reading of Sue Gray's update makes it absolutely clear that the rules were broken multiple times in Downing Street. Will the Prime Minister continue a habit of a lifetime and keep blaming everybody else, or will he finally stand up, take responsibility and just go?
Mr. Speaker, he's really got to read the report. And he's got to look at the report, and he's got to wait. Everything he said, I'm afraid, is not substantiated by the report. He should look and wait for the police inquiry.
Steve Baker. Speaker, millions of people
took seriously a communications campaign apparently designed by behavioural psychologists to bully those people who meticulously complied with all of the rules and suffered terribly for it, including, I might say, those people whose mental health will have suffered appallingly as a result of the messages his government was sending out.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all those people for everything that they did, because together they have helped us to control coronavirus, and I think thanks to their amazing actions in coming forward to get vaccinated, we're now in a far better position than many other countries around the world. So I have a massive debt of gratitude to all the people that he describes.
Then Diana Johnson.
Question asked by my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Yardley. I'm not asking for a running commentary, but I would like to know whether the Prime Minister was present in his flat at the event on the 13th of November 2020.
I'm really grateful to him, Mr. Speaker, and I understand why people want me to elaborate on all sorts of points, but I'm not going to make a running commentary on a matter that is now being considered by the authorities. I've got to wait for them to conclude.
Andrew Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the update that we have from Sue Gray today is, as she says herself, extremely limited, and that it is not possible at present to provide a meaningful report. So will my right honourable friend confirm that at the earliest opportunity he will have the report published in full?
Mr. Speaker, what we will do is wait until the police have concluded their inquiries and then see what more we can publish. That is what we're going to do.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister will recall, on the 8th of December in Prime Minister's questions, I asked him, was there a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November? And now the report says, in the bullet point on the first page, that there was a gathering in the number 10 Downing Street flat, a gathering in the number 10 Downing Street on the departure of a special advisor. Did he inadvertently mislead this House, put us all out of our agony and stop dragging democracy through the mud?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I stick by what I said to her, and she should wait. If she cares about democracy and due process, she should wait until the inquiry has been concluded.
Mark Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a non-drinker who long ago realised that sobriety delivers everything that alcohol promised, I've noticed with interest that a drinking culture exists in Downing Street and in fact predates my right honourable friend's tenure by some decades. Does he, like me, welcome Sue Gray's report, and will he commit to fixing that culture?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much, and we're certainly, Mr. Speaker, going to take up the relevant parts of her recommendations and see that they're properly enforced within the civil service and the SPAD code.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The shocking incompetence of the Met Police has meant that we have a report that has been gutted. But frankly, we didn't need Sue Gray to tell us about the level of dishonour and deception that has infected not only Downing Street, but so many in the party opposite. It has been excruciating to watch so many Tory MPs and ministers willing to defend the indefensible, calculating what's in their own party political interests rather than what's right for our country, complicit in the same decaying system where the pursuit of power trumps integrity. The Prime Minister is certainly a bad apple, but the whole tree is rotten and the whole country wants reform. Couldn't we make a start with a major overhaul of the ministerial code, given that its founding assumption that it could be policed by a Prime Minister of the day because they would be a person of honesty and integrity, that founding assumption has been so widely and comprehensively and utterly discredited.
Mr. Speaker, of all the things that she just, we are reforming the ministerial code, but of all the things that I disagree with her about and what she's just said, I disagree with her most passionately in what she's just said about the police. I think they do an outstanding job. I think we should allow them to get on with that job, and I will await their conclusions.
Thank you, Doyle Price.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I just draw attention to finding number 7 in this report, which documents that actually number 10 Downing Street has morphed from a small team in support of the Prime Minister to a self-indulgent bureaucracy all its own. And I personally am tired of reading Sunday newspapers which read officials briefing against ministers, delays by things being stuck in number 10 as I speak to ministers who are getting frustrated. So can I ask my right honourable friend that as he institutes this review, call me old-fashioned, but ministers are accountable for decisions and that they're taken in their name, not flunkies in number 10, and will he ensure that reforms properly restore ministerial accountability?
Yes. I thank her very much, and I very much enjoyed our joint trip to Tilbury this morning, and I can tell her that, yes, I do think that it's vital, as Sue Gray says, that we learn from this and that we strengthen cabinet government and the principle of ministerial responsibility.
Abdul Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have spoken about my own experience of loss during the pandemic many times. I do not claim that my experiences are special. Indeed, they were all too common. But as a member of Parliament, I have a responsibility to provide a voice for the bereaved families. Make no mistake, this report is utterly damning and suggests that the Prime Minister's and the government's actions were a risk to public health. How on earth can the Prime Minister stand there and justify this? Does he now accept that his actions were a complete and absolute failure of leadership and judgment?
Mr. Speaker, I thank him very much. I repeat what I've said, that I am deeply sorry for all the suffering there's been throughout this pandemic, whether of his constituents or anyone in the country. As to his points about what is in the report, I don't think his views are substantiated by what the report says. But I think he should wait to see where the inquiry goes, and that's what I propose to do.
Suzanne Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable agree with me that those opposite have used far too much time, far too much parliamentary time debating this? And I can assure my right honourable friends that the residents of Stourbridge, they want the Prime Minister to focus on the matters that really they care about.
Just a moment. In fairness, the Prime Minister has to come and make the statement. No, I'm not going to attack the Prime Minister for making a statement. I certainly wouldn't expect it from his own side. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think possibly what I want to say how strongly I agree with nonetheless with my honourable friend, because yes, of course, it's vital that we make this statement. And yes, of course, it's vital that we learn from Sue Gray's report, and vital that we take action, Mr. Speaker, which is what the government is doing. But it's also vital, frankly, that we get on with the people's priorities, and that is what this government is also doing.
Christian Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So just to summarise, I didn't know there was a party. There was a party, but it was a work meeting, and there was a party, but I wasn't there. Why is it? The Prime Minister mentioned international negotiations. Why should anybody, any country, any government with whom we enter into negotiations deal at all and take any kind of word from a government that clearly acts with mendacity of forethought from start to beginning?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is the government that took this country out of the EU and did what was necessary, and this is the government that is bringing the West together to stand up against Vladimir Putin. And those are the important considerations. As for the rest of what he said, Mr. Speaker, it's nonsense, but he should wait for the police inquiry.
Holly Bobby Croft.
Speaker, my constituents in Scunthorpe are very keen to see the industrial energy prices fixed. Will the Prime Minister reassure me that he will not be distracted by any of this and that he will get on with the job and come forward with a solution to that issue?
Yes, I think my honourable friend is completely right. We not only need to address consumer energy costs, we need to address business and industrial energy costs as well. And I know that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will be bringing forward a package of measures as soon as he can.
Kirsten Oswald.
Mr. Speaker, during his statement, the Prime Minister kept referring to we when he talks about the sorry saga that Sue Gray has reported. But Mr. Speaker, it's his rules, it's his rule breaking, it's his inability to tell the truth about it that's the issue. He's the Prime Minister. Does he not take any personal responsibility at all for this disgraceful fiasco?
Mr. Speaker, I've taken full responsibility throughout the pandemic.
Richard Fuller.
Speaker, as with the report on Owen Paterson, I felt it was important to support the process and read the report. And that's because I think it's important to separate fact from allegation and to know what the report actually says rather than what I would wish it to say. Two lessons that the Leader of the Opposition needs to learn. I promised my constituents that I would ask the Prime Minister to say that he would support the recommendations in the report. There are four. That every government department has a clear and robust policy in place covering the consumption of alcohol in the workplace. That access to the garden, including for meetings, should be invitation only and in a controlled environment. That there should be easier ways for staff to raise such concerns, basically whistleblowing, and that too much responsibility and expectation is placed on the senior official whose principal function is the direct support of the Prime Minister. Those are the facts and the findings of the report. Will the Prime Minister accept them in full?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I do. And as I said to the House earlier on, I accept the findings of the report in full, the general findings, and we are immediately taking steps to implement the changes.
Maria Riddle.
The Prime Minister's just said he accepts the findings of the report. One of them says that there were failures of leadership and judgment by different parts of Number 10 in the Cabinet Office at different times. He provides the political leadership and the political judgment at Number 10. Does he accept his own personal wrongdoing and failings in this regard?
Mr. Speaker, not only have I accepted full responsibility throughout, but I have apologised repeatedly to the House for any misjudgments that I may have made myself. But again, I must urge her to wait for the conclusion of the inquiry.
Aaron Bell.
It seems a lot of people attended events in May 2020. The one I recall attending was my grandmother's funeral. She was a wonderful woman. As well as a love for her family, she served her community as a councillor, and she served Dartford Conservative Association loyally for many years. I drove for 3 hours from Staffordshire to Kent. Only 10 people at the funeral. Many people who loved her had to watch online. I didn't hug my siblings. I didn't hug my parents. I gave a eulogy. And then afterwards, I didn't even go to her house for a cup of tea. I drove back 3 hours from Kent to Staffordshire. Does the Prime Minister think I'm a fool?
No, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable friend, and I want to say how deeply I sympathise with him and his family for their loss. And all I can say is, again, that I'm very, very sorry for misjudgments that may be made by me or anybody else in Number 10 and the Cabinet Office. And I can only ask him respectfully, Mr. Speaker, to look at what Sue Gray has said, but also to wait for the conclusion of the inquiry.
I'm Efford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important that this House can trust what ministers tell us from that dispatch box. And on the 8th of December, regarding events at Number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister said, I repeat, that I've been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken. That is what I've been repeatedly assured. Now, the people who gave him those assurances led to him inadvertently misleading the House. So have those people faced any disciplinary proceedings?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, he needs to I'm afraid, to await the conclusions of the police inquiry, because I'm afraid the premise of his question may or may not be substantiated. But what I can tell the House is, yes, as I've said before, there certainly will be changes in the way we do things and changes in number 10.
Duncan Baker.
Speaker, North Norfolk consistently had some of the lowest levels of infection in the country. We followed the rules. So many of my constituents have been incensed. The damage that this is doing to the government is enormous. It is about integrity and trust. Can I ask again, because people want to know, how can the Prime Minister now satisfy my constituents and assure me that full accountability and transparency on the findings of the final Gray report will swiftly follow?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will do whatever I can to ensure that this House has as much clarity as possible. There are legal issues that we face, Mr. Speaker, about some of the testimony that has been given. But in the meantime, what I think Sue Gray wants us to do is to wait for the conclusion of the investigation, of the inquiry, and to see where that goes, and to support the police in their work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister need somebody else to tell him whether he was there or he is there now?
I refer the Honourable Lady to the answer I've already given.
Simon Baines.
Mr. Speaker, we all recognise that number 10 Downing Street is an unusual amalgam of workplace, office space and private home. What steps will the Prime Minister take to ensure that the lines between each of them are made clearer in the future?
Mr. Speaker, you will see that there are reference to that very problem in Sue Gray's report, and we're going to take steps, Mr. Speaker, to clarify things and to make sure there is greater transparency in the lines of command.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister recognise that repeatedly making statements, including from that dispatch box, which turn out subsequently to be untrue, is a serious problem? Or does he not recognise that?
Mr. Speaker, I really think he's prejudging things, and he should wait for the conclusion of the inquiries.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the fact that my right honourable friend has come to this House as a first step in responding to this report. He's also rightly outlined that the relationship between number 10 and this House needs to improve. So will he reassure me that he'll continue to come to this House to update us on the implementation of the recommendations in Sue Gray's report and how that will happen?
Mr. Speaker, I will, of course, I'm only too happy to assure the House that we intend to make changes starting from now, and I will keep the House updated.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When there's a failure of leadership and an inappropriate culture in an organisation, the person at the top should go. This outrageous debacle hasn't happened in spite of the Prime Minister. This has happened because of the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister now do the right thing and resign?
Mr. Speaker, the answer is no, because I'm going to wait for the conclusions of the inquiry before any of the assertions that she's made can be established.
Rex Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for his statement, particularly the acknowledgement of the enormous sacrifice that so many British people went through. And as somebody who was unable to say goodbye to my grandparents this time last year, can I welcome his sincere apology. But as we wait for the Metropolitan Police findings, can my right honourable friend give me a categoric assurance that it will be full speed ahead on fixing the Northern Ireland Protocol, standing up for our friends in Ukraine and fixing the cost of living crisis?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what this government is going to do, and nor will we be distracted for 1 minute.
Wayne David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the general findings to Sue Gray's report,
there's a reference to the failure of leadership and judgment by number 10. Does the Prime Minister accept that Sue Gray was largely referring to him?
Mr. Speaker, I really think that he should recite the whole report, but I have told him that I accept the findings. I've accept the findings that Sue Gray has given in full, and we are acting on them today.
Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend's apology. He's taken responsibility, he's apologised, and it's right that he should do so. Will remain top of the new office of the Prime Minister, because that's what the country wants to see. We want to see this Prime Minister getting on with the job.
Yes, that's right, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we brought forward the Nationalities and Borders Bill, which I'm delighted to say that she supports, that this government is getting through.
Thank you. The flippancy of some of the answers today and the non-answers to other questions don't suggest that the Prime Minister is genuinely that sorry. Does he recognise the long-term damage he risks doing to historic norms of democracy? Is it right that they are sacrificed for the interests of one man who refused to do what the country knows needs to happen? And can he point to one single example where he personally has improved standards in public life?
How about, Mr. Speaker, deciding to honour the wishes of the people and deliver Brexit in spite of their attempts, Mr. Speaker, to subvert democracy?
Rob Roberts. Mr. Speaker, delivery is key. The Prime Minister delivers. He delivered on Brexit. He delivered with furlough and with the self-employed scheme that ensured businesses were able to survive. They can shout it down because they don't like it, Mr. Speaker, that's fine. He delivered with one of the best vaccination programs in the world. He delivered a country that is coming out of a pandemic and an economy that is thriving, with people who sadly lost their jobs in the last 2 years having more vacancies than ever to choose from. But nobody talks about those things, Mr. Speaker, because all sides of those things...
Order. I think the Prime Minister may have just got a grip of what you've had to say. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're going to deliver on the people's priorities, and we're going to deliver and keep delivering for Wales.
Florence Session-Lomé.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the hardest things I had to do as an MP is speak to the family of Ismail Mohammed Abdulwali. He was 13 years old when he died on the 30th of March. He was one of the youngest people to lose his life to COVID. I will admit, Mr. Speaker, when I spoke to his mother, I broke down on that call. Ishmael's family, like so many other constituents up and down in Vauxhall, followed the rule. Many of them were scared to go out. Many of them had to bury their loved ones without being there. Many of them walked past the COVID memorial wall in my constituency with that heart showing their loss. Does the Prime Minister now understand, and does he not feel ashamed that his actions have brought disrepute to the office that he holds?
Mr. Speaker, of course I share the honourable lady's grief for Ishmael. I sympathise with Ishmael's family, and I understand the pain and loss that everybody's experienced throughout this country. But, Mr. Speaker, all I can say is that I will continue to do my best to fight COVID, as I have done throughout this pandemic, and to deliver for the British people. And I can't say more than that.
Marco Logie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, running an office and having the required management expertise of running literally dozens and dozens of offices with hundreds and hundreds of people within is one thing. Running the country and getting the big decisions right are quite another. So can I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to have a look at what is happening at number 10 and those management structures, so that we can deliver on the promises and the Brexit promises we gave the people of this country.
I thank him very much, and that's why we're taking up the findings of the Sue Gray report. We want to make sure that number 10 works better, that the whole of the government works better. It's been focused very much on COVID, but we now need to deliver exclusively on the great priorities of the people.
Anna Balder.
Last summer, my team and I said goodbye to our colleague through the window of her hospice as she died of cancer. We didn't get to hug her, and we were just like many millions of people across the UK. We followed the rules while he and his colleagues didn't. And it makes me sick to my stomach that we are not going to get the findings of this report because the police were so late to the party. The same Met Police who were happy to arrest women who were protesting the murder of Sarah Everard. And it makes me sick to my stomach that he does not understand the anger and fury and upset of millions of people across the UK, because sometimes, Mr. Speaker, an apology won't cut it. It's time for action. It's time for a clear out. It's time for him to resign.
Mr. Speaker, I sympathise very much with the experience of her constituents and all the pain that people have gone through throughout this pandemic. I must say to her, though, that she is prejudging the issue in question today. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I have a great deal of respect for the police, and I think they should be allowed to get on with their job.
Paul Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we've got to remember that we're all talking about the breaking of the rules, and the rules clearly are under question here as to what's happened. But the rules themselves that were put out by this government have got this country to where it is. And we've got to remember that those rules did the right thing. So yes, there's got to be consequences in number 10 for any rules that have been broken. But please remember, the right thing was done by the instigation of the rules in the first place. And I have to say, when I'm talking to my constituents out there, they're saying, yes, we need to ask the question about what's happened there, but can we stop being that as the only sole subject? And can the opposition talk about something else as well, please? Do we need to move on and level up this country?
I thank my honourable friend very much, and I think he's right. The rules are important, and it was amazing, and remains amazing to see the way people pulled together throughout the pandemic, and I thank people very much. But what we need to do, if we possibly can, Mr. Speaker, if the opposition would agree, we now need to focus on the issues that matter above all to the British people: fixing the cost of living, rebuilding our economy, clearing the COVID backlogs. That's what this government is doing.
Very Sherman.
Speaker, I have known the Prime Minister a long time, and we've always got on quite well. He's not a wicked man, but he's a man that for years in every job has got by flying on the seat of his pants. He has a chaotic management style, and that is a question of character. And can I ask him really to look in the mirror, as he said this morning, and say, am I the man at this challenging time for our country, abroad, at home, in every sense? Has he the character to carry on and do that job properly?
No. Yes, Mr. Speaker, because quite frankly, I think it was absolutely indispensable that we had a strong number 10 that was able to take us out of the EU in spite of all the efforts of the party opposite to block it. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, a booster and a vaccine campaign that were led by number 10 that have made a dramatic difference, not just to the health of this country, but to the economic fortunes of this country. And whatever he says about me and my leadership, that is what we have delivered in the last year alone.
Scott Benson.
You, Mr. Speaker, when knocking indoors in Blackpool at the weekend, I spoke to Julie, who said this: this Prime Minister has had the most difficult job in living history. He's been dealing with a pandemic in which he nearly died. He's been dealing with the media who haven't forgiven him for delivering Brexit. And yet, he's been dealing with the media who haven't forgiven him yet for dealing with Brexit, and he hasn't had a chance to crack on and deliver yet for the British people on their priorities. The report today has come out. The Prime Minister has apologised. Let's allow him to get on and deal. He wants to hear it.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say how passionately, vehemently and emphatically I agree with the remarks, which I couldn't quite hear, of my honourable friend. He is completely right, Mr. Speaker, and I think that is the priority of the British people. That's the priority of the government.
Rams.
limited as the Gray report was, we know that the findings are still incredibly damning. Multiple issues around failures of leadership and judgment. Now, given that the Nolan principles and standards of public life describe the centrality of integrity, honesty and leadership, how can the Prime Minister continue?
I really think that she needs to read the report carefully, Mr. Speaker, and I'm afraid that the conclusions that she's drawing are not ones that I support. But what we are doing, Mr. Speaker, is following Sue Gray's advice, and we are changing the way Number 10 runs, and we are going to do things differently, Mr. Speaker. But I can't agree with what she says.
Catherine Fletcher.
Mr. Speaker, on Saturday I was out and about enjoying ice cream in Lancashire, which I know you and your family do in some of the finest ice cream parlours in the north of England. And they said to me, he's a Wally, but 100,000 Russians have just turned up. What the bloody hell are we doing talking about cake? Does the Prime Minister agree with that statement?
Mrs. Speaker, I thank her very much. I thank her very much, and I think that what the country needs and what the West needs. Sorry.
Can I just say, if you don't want to carry on the question, I'm happy to pull stumps now. But if we are going to have questions, I'm going to hear the answers as well as the questions. Prime Minister, standing up, mate. You're going to have to sit down for a bit.
What the country needs now, Mr. Speaker, is a UK government working with our friends and partners to stand up to Vladimir Putin and to make sure that we have a strong package of sanctions, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister sets the culture at number 10. Why does he think that staff members there felt unable to raise their concerns about the bad behaviours reported today?
Mr. Speaker, that is one of the recommendations of the Sue Gray inquiry that we are going to take up to make sure that nobody should feel that in number 10, and that's why we're going to review the code to ensure that nobody feels that they have any inhibition on coming forward with any complaint that they may have.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and his allies are trying to distract and deflect from the truth. But here are the indisputable facts. The Prime Minister attended Downing Street parties. He told this House and the people that we represent that he attended no parties, and in fact that there were no parties. The rules were clearly broken. The ministerial code has been violated. So when will he stop insulting the intelligence of the British people and do the right thing and resign?
Mr. Speaker, I really think she's got to let the Metropolitan Police get on and do their job.
Brendan O'Hara.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister not recognise that the public are rapidly losing faith in the institutions that they must be able to trust if our democracy is to survive? Because it appears that there is no individual, no organisation, no group or no force whose reputation won't be sacrificed on the altar of saving this Prime Minister. So can I ask the Prime Minister, does he consider the erosion of public trust in the foundations of our democracy a price worth paying to ensure his personal survival?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that amongst the foundations of our democracy are due process and the rule of law and allowing the police to get on with their job. And that's what we're going to do.
Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Part 4 of Sue Gray's report says that there is a culture of excessive consumption of alcohol, which is not appropriate. Is there also a culture of excessive drug taking in Downing Street?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, any drug taking would be excessive, and perhaps he should direct that question at the Labour front bench.
Question. Direct Twig.
Mr. Speaker,
we've heard all about prejudging things today. You only have to look at paragraph 3 of the general findings, which talks about failures of leadership, judgment in different parts of number 10 of the Cabinet Office, and it says some events should never have been allowed to take place, and other events should not have been allowed to develop as it did. I don't think that's prejudging anything. It's very clear. There's only one person in charge of number 10 in totality, and that's the Prime Minister. So let me just remind the Prime Minister why this matters about this rule breaking and the way number 10 behaved. Let me quote a constituent, one of a number of emails I had from constituents who lost loved ones. She said to me, "We received a call at 11:15 p.m. on the 29th of May 2020 saying Mum was deteriorating. Both my sister and I drove to the home and spent the night sat on a chair outside her bedroom window watching her die. All I could do was sob and shout to her and tell her that I loved her. I couldn't even hold her hand. That's why you should go, Prime Minister." Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I totally understand the feelings of his constituents, and I accept that things could have been done better in number 10, as I've told the House before. But really, I must ask him to study what Sue Gray has said, and we are acting on all her recommendations.
Naveed Whittam.
Which one of them, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister explain how changing the civil service hierarchy will prevent him from breaching the COVID regulations, as he has admitted in this House? When will he take responsibility for his own actions, stop hiding behind other people? My constituents don't want another government department. They want him to resign.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's wrong in what she said, and I direct her to what I've said earlier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's been further revealed that in April 2021, as the Prime Minister partied, he also swiftly rejected the idea of bereavement bubbles for those who'd lost loved ones, suffered miscarriages, stillbirths, or a child neonatal death. Far from getting it, he's deflected, laughed, and smirked his way through this statement. He's a disingenuous man, isn't he?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know this has been a harrowing and tragic experience for the entire country. We've done our best to deal with it. And as for what she says about what's been going on in number 10, I ask her to look at the report, but also to wait for the police inquiry.
Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, this afternoon we've heard the distraction, the deflection, there's confusion, and we can't even get the answers to the most simplest of questions about whether we can actually get the full report published when it's available. So, Mr. Speaker, could I ask the Prime Minister, is it the case now that we're looking at a situation of hobble, hobble, quack, quack?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, nothing would give me greater pleasure than to publish everything that we currently have. But the fact is, Mr. Speaker, that there are legal impediments and we have to wait until the police inquiry is concluded.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I accept entirely what the Prime Minister has just said. It is absolutely essential that we wait. It's absolutely essential that we wait until we hear the next stage in these proceedings in relation to any future investigations. I'd also like to draw attention to the historic achievements of this Prime Minister in relation to not only delivering Brexit, but in relation to delivering the vaccine rollout and in relation to his dealings with Mr. Putin. And I believe that everybody should take that most firmly into account.
I thank you very much, and I think he's completely right. He might have added, by the way, that we have the fastest economic growth in the G7, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the steps this government has been taking.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. We've established that there were parties. We are just really arguing about who is responsible. And as the Honourable Member for Thurrock said earlier, that's a minister. So if it's not him, is it the member for Surrey Heath or North East Cambridgeshire who should be facing the sack?
Prime Minister.
I remind the Honourable Lady what Sue Gray says in her paragraph. Well, no such conclusion can be drawn so far, Mr. Speaker. She must wait. She must wait for the conclusion of the inquiry.
Janet David.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced at the weekend that he would be calling President Putin to urge de-escalation of the situation in Ukraine. The Mirror have just reported that today the call has been cancelled because he's been dealing with the Sue Gray report. So can the Prime Minister confirm that on a matter of such grave importance that this report is correct and that we'll be speaking to Vladimir Putin as soon as he leaves the chamber?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be speaking to President Putin as soon as I can.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have read the report in full, and I think the most striking sentence was the one that there were failures of leadership and judgment in different parts of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office at different times. My constituents who've been writing to me whilst the Prime Minister has been speaking say that he should resign, but they also want to know the full facts. Once the Met has concluded, why could he not then publish the full unredacted report?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we'll have to see where the police get to. We'll have to see the conclusion of their inquiry. We'll have to see what the legal position is then, Mr. Speaker.
Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituents are deeply troubled and angry by the frequent scandals engulfing the Prime Minister's administration. Because it's not just the Partygate and ongoing cover-up, but all the other things. The proroguing of Parliament, the treatment of the Queen, the 3.5 billion of chronic COVID contracts, the writing of 4.3 billion COVID loan fraud, and the Russia report, to name but a few. Sussex University researchers have warned that Boris Johnson's administration is more corrupt than any other administration since Second World War. Does the Prime Minister know this, doesn't he?
Prime Minister.
Well, I think the honourable gentleman's point is completely ridiculous. He mentions what we did, for instance, to get Brexit done, which was absolutely crucial to restore public trust in democracy.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Like me, many of my constituents have been appalled by the reports of what's been happening in Number 10 and will welcome the fact that my right honourable friend has come to the House today and has apologised in a first step to responding to this. Will he assure me that he will continue to keep the House updated on the implementation of the measures he's taking in the report? And also, will he ensure that there's full cooperation from the whole of the Number 10 team to the inquiries from the Met so they conclude as swiftly as possible?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, of course I will keep the House updated, and of course everybody in Number 10 will cooperate to the full with the Met.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is surely now a new low. A Prime Minister of our country forced to come here to the Mother of Parliaments and plead the fifth in a criminal investigation because he knows if the truth is told, it will incriminate himself. So let me just ask the Prime Minister a simple question. If he cannot get his facts straight about whether or not he was at a party in his own flat, how will anyone in this House ever believe a word he says again? And how will our partners around the world ever put their trust in him?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to dignify that question with an answer except to say that he's got to wait. Everything he said is completely prejudicial.
Alan Brown.
Mr. Speaker, I thought people of Lancashire were supposed to be straight speaking because I can assure people that my constituents are calling the Prime Minister a lot more than a wally, words I can't repeat. The reality is here we've got staff were too frightened to raise concerns about behaviour they knew were ongoing. Half the staff invited to bring your own booze party didn't turn up because they knew it was wrong, but yet the Prime Minister said he thought it was a work event and within the rules. His lack of leadership and judgment is also shown by the let the bodies pile high comment about a second lockdown. The one thing the leader of the Scottish Tories has said that is true is this Prime Minister is not fit for office. Now, given he'll do anything to save his own skin, does that mean the leader of the Scottish Tories is going to get binned as well?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I direct him to what I've said earlier on.
Mick Whitley.
I think no one said in this House here this afternoon that 155,000 people died of COVID. That's why we introduced the rules. But this is simply not the comprehensive report that the British public were promised for so long. But at least it's clear in its findings that there were serious failures, and I quote, to observe not just the high standards expected of those working at the House of Government, but also of the standards expected of the entire British population at the height of the pandemic. Does the Prime Minister accept responsibility for his failure to live up to the standards which the rest of us were expected to uphold?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I take responsibility for everything that happened in Number 10 and that the government did throughout the pandemic.
Harry Gardner.
The Great Report is clear that there should be no excessive consumption of alcohol in a workplace. Can the Prime Minister not excessive, and in particular that his judgment was at no time so clouded that he was in danger of telling the truth?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I couldn't quite hear the end of the right honourable gentleman's question, but the answer is no. If he thinks I've drunk too much, no.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister wants my constituents to suspend their disbelief and wait for the Met Police to report. In which case, will he at least give them clarity that should the Metropolitan Police issue him with a fixed penalty notice for participation at his party, he will resign?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he really needs to wait and see what the Met decide.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. We've had excessive whataboutery, bluster and bravado from the Prime Minister. I suggest to him politely that we need a lot more humility from him, given that whilst the Grey Report might be paper thin, it's very clear in the serious failings at Number 10. Fish rots from its head. Can I suggest to the Prime Minister, it's not a new Prime Minister's office we need, it's a new Prime Minister.
I hear him, and I simply repeat what I've said earlier on. I'm grateful to Sue Gray for taking action following her report, but he needs to wait for the conclusion of the inquiry.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Sue Gray has made it clear that this is not a report, but it's an update on the investigation into COVID breaches in Downing Street. Indeed, in her update, Ms Gray says she is extremely limited in what she can say and, quote, it is not possible at present to provide a meaningful report. If it is the case that there's nothing to see here, move on, as the Prime Minister today is desperately trying to convince us, why has he repeatedly refused to commit to publish the full report even after the police investigation has completed? And what does it say about the benches opposite, those populating them, if they still genuinely think that he is the best amongst them to be Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, that's not what I've said.
Neil Coyle.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister told Parliament and told the British people that there were no parties. We now know he attended several, including one at which he was ambushed with cake in his most pathetic excuse yet. Given his previous statements, which we know to be patently false, how does he explain why this report says at least 12 parties in his home warrant police investigation?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's proved several times in that question that he hasn't got the faintest idea what he's talking about, and he should wait for the outcome of the inquiry.
Rupa Hart.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and his apologists up to now had explained these things away as one-offs, a work do, ambushed by a cake, all those kind of things. But this report makes clear that it was a repeated pattern of behaviour, the booze-ups after work that nobody else was having, all our constituents who followed the rules. So can I ask him as well, it also says that there's an investigation of a Downing Street party on the 13th of November 2020. Why did he tell my honourable friend for Hornsey and Wood Green on the 8th of December that no such gathering took place? And subsequently, he's told my right honourable friend, our leader, that anyone who from that dispatch box tells mistruths should resign. Is he a man of his words?
Mr. Speaker, she needs to look at what I said, and she needs to look at the outcome. She needs to look at the outcome of the inquiry.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister said in a statement earlier that he understands the anger of people in this country. But does he also understand that while they've been watching this, for many people in this country, their greatest fears about how this would be handled have been realised. They've seen an apology, yes, but obfuscation, delay, tinkering, rather than an acceptance of responsibility. The Prime Minister says he wants to go on and deal with the important issues facing this country. Perhaps the only way we will be able to do that is for the Prime Minister to accept that he has become an obstacle to it and resign.
Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, we're going to get on with the job.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister was wrong in something he said earlier. The Sue Gray update can be both damning and incomplete. And most of us can only guess how much more damning the full report is going to be. And his colleagues should worry about that. I think he knows how bad it's going to be because he knows what's gone on. So isn't that the real reason why he won't commit to publishing the report in full when the police have completed their investigation?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, he's totally prejudging the whole thing. He needs to contain himself. No, he needs to contain himself and wait for the police to complete their inquiries.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Sue Gray update is not the report that this House deserves. It is not the transparency that the public were expecting. But it does make it very clear that there were failures of leadership at number 10. The Prime Minister is the leader at number 10. So will he now pack his suitcase or will he leave it to his officials to carry his cans?
Mr. Speaker, he just needs to look at the report again and he needs to wait for the conclusions of the inquiry.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Look her in the eyes and tell her you never bend the rules. A lot of us remember that campaign. It cost tens of millions of taxpayers' money. On the 13th of November in 2020, he bent the rules, didn't he?
Mr. Speaker, I refer him to what I've said earlier on in this House. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, he needs to wait until the conclusion of the police inquiry.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This morning, the Conservative Party in Scotland issued a press release, and it stated, and I quote, "The pandemic sees a rise in criminals getting away with crimes." Were they talking about the Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, what we're actually doing is cutting crime by 40% and putting 20,000 more police on the streets.
Roshanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Week in, week out, throughout this pandemic, I, like many of my colleagues, had to deal with constituents who couldn't see their dying relatives or grieve with them. And some of us were directly affected when we lost family members and loved ones. The Prime Minister's actions have made a mockery of the British people's sacrifices during the pandemic. And now he's the subject of a criminal investigation. It's a new low for our country and our democracy, and it makes a mockery of our democracy to the rest of the world. If the Prime Minister takes responsibility for everything that has happened, as he has said, isn't it time that he put his party, this Parliament, and the country out of their misery and steps down so that we can move on and focus on the national interest? Because at the moment, it is not possible because of the crisis that he and number 10 have created.
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's clear that the Prime Minister has used these parties, like many an under-par manager, to buy popularity and favour. Can the Prime Minister tell us if he's using the same techniques when negotiating treaties and trade deals with international leaders?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Today should have been about contrition and remorse, but it seems that the Prime Minister doesn't understand the meaning of sorry. Instead, it has insulted the people that have suffered and sacrificed for the last 2 years. One question that many people want to know is who is paying for these investigations, the police and Sue Gray's report, and who is paying for his legal advice? Is it the taxpayer?
Prime Minister.
I must say, I think that she's wrong in what she says. As for who is covering the police costs, the police are covering the police costs.
Daisy Cooper. So
Peter referred to this as the Grey Report. When if you had read as far as the front cover, he would see it was called an update. It is because it is an update that it makes public trust in the Met's investigation even more important. The public must know that the Met will investigate without fear or favour. So can the Prime Minister confirm that not at any single stage anybody in Number 10 or the Cabinet Office has sought to influence the Met's decision on delaying its investigation, or was the delay a result of its own incompetence?
No, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and the only people calling into question the Met's independence are, I think, the side opposite on her benches.
McMurran.
Thank you. The Prime Minister has seriously misjudged the mood of the country, and indeed he has misjudged the mood of his own backbenchers. My constituent wrote to me devastated and upset. He couldn't see his disabled son, his elderly mother with dementia, and his newborn child putting a serious toll on his mental health. Like millions across the country, he followed the rules, but the Prime Minister thinks he's above the rules. Instead, he blames his civil service and he restructures. Will he do the decent thing and resign?
Mr. Speaker, I disagree with her profoundly, because I do understand people's feelings, and I do understand why this is so important for people. But I must say that I think the best thing now is for the inquiry to be concluded, and in the meantime for us all to get on with the work that I think everybody wants us to do.
Marion Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I have enjoyed the exercise this afternoon. I've also wanted to enjoy the Prime Minister's answers to questions, but unfortunately he's ducked, dived, he's done everything but answer questions about a party on the 13th of November, about whether he'll put out the final report. Okay, I'll ask him one more, asked already. If you get a fine, a fixed penalty fine from the Metropolitan Police after all this is over, will you pay it yourself or ask a Tory donor to pay it for you?
Mr. Speaker, there's a process. We've got to wait for it to conclude.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Among those who were the most isolated during the pandemic were people with learning disabilities, cut off from visits from their families, not even allowed an advocate if they were admitted to hospital. For too many, restrictions to services and the awful isolation without visitors that the PM's rules expected them to follow were a matter of life and death. The mortality rate for people with learning disabilities from COVID was 8 times that of the general population. When he thinks about the damage done to all those groups who are so isolated and their families, and the serious failings of leadership and judgment in Number 10 found by this independent investigation, how can he think his position is tenable?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, she's entirely right about the suffering of people with learning disabilities, and indeed all vulnerable groups who are exposed to lockdowns for long periods. And that's why actually we worked so hard to make sure that we could get this country out of lockdown and keep it out of lockdown, and that was our objective.
Stuart Hosey.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't need to wait for the full Sue Gray report, because this one tells me one important fact. There were a heck of a lot of parties. So can I ask there were a heck of a lot of parties, Prime Minister. So let me ask the Prime Minister, at which point during this catalogue of frivolity, while he was clearing last night's empty wine bottles off his desk before settling down to work the following afternoon, did he conclude that having one rule for him and another one for the general public was undermining his own health messaging and costing people's lives?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman is misrepresenting what Sue Gray says. He's also, perhaps inadvertently, but he's also completely misrepresenting what happened.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This report confirms what we already know, the abject failure in leadership at number 10. So will the Prime Minister take responsibility and do what the constituents in Liverpool and Riverside are asking for, your representation, so that we can get on and deal with the crisis facing this country? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I refer to what I've said earlier on.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. On the 8th of December, the Prime Minister told this House, and I quote, "I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken." Well, just who gave him those assurances? Because given he was at some of the parties and at least one of them was in his own flat, he shouldn't need anyone else to tell him what happened. So it looks like when the Prime Minister spoke those words, he was either fooling himself or was he just trying to fool everyone else?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he needs to wait and see. He needs to wait and see what the inquiry concludes, and that is what due process demands. And I stick, Mr. Speaker, by what I said.
I can see 8 people standing, and that is the last 8 I'm going to take, just to let you know. Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Section 5.1 of the Ministerial Code says ministers must uphold the political impartiality of the civil service and not ask civil servants to act in any way which would conflict with the Civil Service Code. And finding 6 of Sue Gray's report, which I have read, says some staff wanted to raise concerns about behaviours they witnessed at work, but felt unable to do so. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that if his staff, and in fact civil servants and workers everywhere, feel afraid to raise concerns regarding inappropriate behaviour at work, that they should contact their trade union rep or join a trade union?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, that's why I've accepted the conclusions of the Sue Gray findings in full, and we will implement the changes.
I assume that everybody standing has also been here for the opening statement and throughout. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've listened carefully to the statement, the questions, the answers, and indeed to my constituents, many of whom have been devastated to hear that there may have been parties and some of whom have suffered great hardship. I'm very glad that the Prime Minister has come here to apologise and to take on board the recommendations, but I am concerned that this is taking time and attention away from key issues. This statement alone has been going on for nearly 2 hours. The Prime Minister has achieved great things with Brexit and vaccines, but has achieved great things with Brexit and vaccines. Can he assure this House and me and my constituents that this ongoing investigation and the reorganisation of number 10 is not going to take his laser-like focus away from the issues that matter to them?
Yes, I can give my honourable friend that absolute assurance.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Has a date yet been set for the Prime Minister to be interviewed by the Metropolitan Police in connection with their inquiry?
The police are independent and they must get on with their inquiry.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This reads like a dreadful, poorly written soap opera, an unbelievable soap opera. I hear members opposite saying how important it is for their constituents to go on with the day job. My constituents are incandescent at the behaviour of this Prime Minister. Will he accept the damage he's doing to the office of elected representatives, all of us, and will he do the right thing and clear out?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for the reasons I've already given.
Steve Bonner.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, we do know that staff are being made to work in conditions that made them feel uneasy, perhaps even unsafe, Prime Minister. And they also felt that they were unable to say something. People exposed to a potentially deadly virus, unable to say something in their workplace, while parties were raging on around about them. At least some, says Mrs Gray, represent a serious failure to observe the high standards expected of those working at the heart of government. Who is responsible for that, Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's completely misrepresenting what took place.
Gavin Newlands.
Come on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Despite the omissions from Sue Gray's update, it makes crystal clear that the office he occupies and the government he leads behaved in a despicable and disrespectful way when the public faced the gravest of threats. Does not accept that his personal conduct before becoming Prime Minister and since is completely unacceptable, and if he had any respect for his own office, the public, indeed even a scintilla
of integrity. He would announce his resignation to the 1922 committee tonight.
Yeah.
No, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Stuart MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I ask, when will the various statements made by the Prime Minister from that dispatch box about the subject of parties and gatherings at Downing Street be investigated under the ministerial code? And isn't it absolutely farcical that that's a question for the Prime Minister at all?
Mr. Speaker, we have an investigation going on. I think that's the one people should focus on, and they should allow the police to get on with their job.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In his statement, the Prime Minister said, "Sorry for the things we did not get right. Sorry for the way this has been handled." A generic non-apology that will mean absolutely nothing to anyone that's heard it. But what I and millions of others want to hear is, apart from getting caught out in all of this, what is it that the Prime Minister is personally sorry for and genuinely regretful for in terms of his own conduct? And if he just resorts back to that tired, hackneyed form of words that he used to begin with, doesn't it just show that it's not a new office of the Prime Minister that we need? It's a new Prime Minister in office.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've repeated several times how sorry I am for any misjudgments that I made, and I continue to apologise for them. All I can say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that we need to get on and await the outcome of the inquiry, but allow the government to deliver on the priorities of this country, and that is to unite and level up, to continue to cut crime, to make colossal investments across our whole country, and that is what we are going to do.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for his statement today and answering questions for just short of 2 hours. I'm just going to pause as people leave and others take their places for the next statement. See you, Simon. Very good on reading. Order. We now come to the second of the three statements today, and we have the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs, Liz Truss.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, with permission, I would like to make a statement on what we are doing to tackle Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Moscow's malign intent is clear. They have massed over 100,000 troops on Ukraine's frontier. Russian forces are continuing to arrive in Belarus. It is only 8 years since Russia illegally annexed Crimea and stoked conflict in the Donbass region, so we know the danger is real. They have been pursuing a campaign of hybrid warfare aimed at destabilizing the country. Just last week, we exposed the Kremlin's plans to install a puppet regime in Kiev. This threatening behavior towards a sovereign, democratic, independent country is completely unacceptable. It is a clear violation of the commitments and obligations that Russia freely signed up to, from the OSCE Helsinki Final Act and the Minsk Protocols to the Budapest Memorandum, which guaranteed to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine. The only way forward is for Russia to de-escalate, pull back its troops, and engage in meaningful talks on the basis of these existing obligations. That's why the UK is determined to lead the way through deterrence and diplomacy. The Prime Minister will travel to the region this week, and later today, the UK will be joining discussions at the UN Security Council to apply further pressure on Russia to take the diplomatic route. I will be flying out to Moscow over the next fortnight. This builds on our campaign of diplomatic engagement over recent weeks and months. I have led calls through the G7, NATO and the OSCE to urge Russia to desist in its reckless and destabilizing activities in Ukraine as well as Georgia, the Baltics and the Western Balkans. I've raised these issues directly with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Both the United States and NATO have set out areas where we could explore reciprocal measures to increase transparency, reduce risk and take forward arms control. The ball is firmly in Russia's court. While we're determined to accelerate these efforts, we do so from a position of strength. We are combining dialogue with deterrence. And that's why the Prime Minister is considering options for further deployments of our armed forces to reassure and protect allies on NATO's eastern flank. We're preparing to offer to support NATO with additional fast jets, warships, and military specialists. As NATO's biggest spender in Europe on defence, we are prepared to deploy our forces accordingly. We've been very clear that a united alliance would meet any further Russian invasion of Ukraine with massive consequences for Russia's interests and economy. And we're preparing an unprecedented package of coordinated sanctions with our partners, which would impose severe costs. Today, I am setting out our readiness to act. We will be laying legislation before the House that will significantly strengthen our hand in dealing with Russia's aggressive action towards Ukraine. It will go further than ever before. Until now, the UK has only been able to sanction those linked to destabilisation of Ukraine. This new legislation will give us the power to sanction a much broader range of individuals and businesses. We will be able to target any company that is linked to the Russian state, engages in business of economic significance to the Russian state, or operates in a sector of strategic significance to the Russian state. Not only will we be able to target these entities, we will also be able to go after those who own or control them. This will be the toughest sanction regime against Russia we have ever had, and it is the most radical departure in approach since leaving the European Union. Those in and around the Kremlin will have nowhere to hide. We will make sure that those who share responsibility for the Kremlin's aggressive and destabilising action will share in bearing a heavy cost. Their assets in the UK will be frozen. No UK business or individual would be able to transact with them, and should they seek to enter the UK, they would be turned back. Laying this legislation now will enable us to act in concert with the United States and other partners rapidly, multiplying our collective impact. We will use these new powers in a targeted manner designed to damage the interests of those who bear the greatest responsibility for Russia's actions and exert the greatest pressure to change course. I will not say now exactly who we may target or with what measure, but Moscow should be clear that we will use these new powers to maximum effect if they pursue their aggressive intent towards Ukraine. Nothing is off the table. We are also standing with our Ukrainian friends by providing vital support to help them defend themselves. That's where we're supplying the country with defensive anti-tank missiles and deploying a training team of British personnel. We've already trained over 21,000 members of the Ukrainian army through Operation Orbital. And in addition, we're stepping up our investment in Ukraine's future, ramping up support for trade, up to 3.5 billion, including 1.7 billion to boost Ukraine's naval capability. We will continue to stand united with Ukraine. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it might seem hard to believe that in the 21st century, the citizens of a proud sovereign European democracy are living under the threat of invasion. We know from the lessons of history that this course of action would benefit no one. I do not believe that ordinary Russian citizens want to enter into an intractable quagmire of needless death and destruction that could rival the Soviet-Afghan war or the conflict in Chechnya. Indeed, we have no quarrel whatsoever with the Russian people, only with the policies pursued by its leader. It is time for the Kremlin to step back from the brink, to de-escalate and enter into meaningful dialogue. If they do not, they should be in no doubt. We will be ready to use the powers I have set out today to maximum effect. We will join our allies and partners to ensure such reckless action will bring huge consequences at massive cost. We will defend freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. I commend this statement to the House.
David Lammy.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance sight of her statement and for our discussions on this issue. I'm very grateful. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as we in the opposition have been clear since this crisis began, we stand in resolute support of Ukraine's sovereignty and in opposition to Russian aggression. We support the essential international diplomatic efforts to achieve de-escalation and the defensive support provided to Ukraine. I said in Kiev 2 weeks ago, and I say it again now, on these benches, we believe it is important to send a united message from the whole of the House. That is why we welcome moves by the government to lay the groundwork for a robust and extensive package of sanctions against Russia in the event of any incursion or attack on Ukraine. We believe these measures must be broad, severe, and comprehensive. They must apply widely to crucial sectors of the Russian economy without gaps or loopholes. They must target corrupt elites who store their money in our country. They must target not just relevant Russian entities, but those who enable, who support, who service, who facilitate their activities. So can the Foreign Secretary confirm that UK subsidiaries of any new sanctioned targets would not be carved out of scope? We know that some oligarchs have used their wealth to seek influence and protect themselves from criticism. So can I ask for her assurance that these measures will be applied without fear or favour? Given these measures were pre-briefed and include broad categories of potential targets, can I ask her what assessment she has made of the risks of asset flight and what steps she's taken to protect against that? Mr. Deputy Speaker, these sanctions are conditional on Russians' actions. Their purpose is to form a serious deterrent, which, when matched by unified action and the work of the G7, NATO and the OSCE, will make President Putin think again. But there is much more we must do irrespective of the decisions made by President Putin. Things that it should not have taken an army threatening Ukraine to put in place. Things the opposition have repeatedly urged the government to address. For years, the Labour Party and colleagues from across this House have raised the alarm about the role of dirty money in keeping Putin in power. Mr. Deputy Speaker, for too long, our defences have been let down at home while the government looks abroad. Warning after warning, report after report, the government has been asleep at the wheel. London is the destination of choice for the world's kleptocrats. We are the home to the services and the enablers who help corrupt elites to hide their ill-gotten wealth. We have a system of corporate transparency that permits the products of larceny on a grand scale to be hidden under our noses. And the result is the embarrassing spectacle of President Biden being warned that the widespread presence of suspect Russian money in the UK could jeopardize Britain's response to this crisis. This is not a matter simply of individuals, though welcome though that is. It's about fixing a broken system, our openness to fraud and money laundering, our inadequate regulation of political donations, our lax mechanisms of corporate governance, our weakness to foreign interference. So can I ask the Right Honourable Lady, where is the economic crime bill the government just pulled? Where is the comprehensive reform of Companies House? Where is the register of overseas entitlements bill? Where is the foreign agent registration law? Where are the new counter-espionage laws? Where are new rules on political donations? Where is the reform of Tier 1 golden visas? Where is the replacement of the outdated Computer Misuse Act? Where is the reform of the Electoral Commission? And why does the government's election bill make these problems worse by enabling political donations from donors based overseas? Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady's movement on sanctions is welcome, but there is much, much more to do. These steps at home are not distinct from sanctions or diplomacy abroad. They must form part of a unified and coherent response, one that has been urged consistently by the chair of the Intelligence Select Committee. If she truly wants to fix the problem, she must start there.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, first of all, can I thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for his constructive approach. And I think it's vital that all members of the House demonstrate their support for freedom and democracy in the face of severe aggression by the Russian regime, not just on the borders of Ukraine, but also through Belarus, into the Western Balkans, and in fact, across the world. And I will take forward the united message that I've heard from the whole House onto our friends in Ukraine, who very much welcome the support that they have been offered by the United Kingdom, both the economic support, the support in terms of defensive weaponry, but also the support in the face of Russian aggression. This package that we are putting forward in legislation will be in place by the 10th of February. So we are able to enact wide-ranging sanctions in broad categories that really target anybody that is providing strategic or economic support to the Russian regime. There will be nowhere to hide, and we will apply those sanctions without fear or favour. I am very clear about that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we've already taken steps to tighten up our regime on corruption and illicit finance through the Criminal Finances Act 2017, the global anti-corruption sanctions regime we've put in place. We're reviewing all Tier 1 visas granted before the 5th of April. And we will be introducing the economic crime bill. The Prime Minister committed to that at the Summit of Democracies with President Biden at the end of last year. Let me assure the House that our priority is the defence of freedom and democracy. That comes before any short-term economic interest for our country, but also the whole of Europe. We must wean ourselves and others off dependence on Russian gas. We must target the criminal and corrupt money, and that is what we are determined to do with this extension of our sanctions regime, the most radical we have done yet.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to hear from my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, about the tightening of this sanction regime, something that she knows that the Foreign Affairs Committee has called for 4 years. It's extremely welcome that she's looking hard at dirty money, and I find myself in agreement with my right honourable friend, the member for Tottenham. The need to clean up the dirty money in our economy is not just about doing the right thing and standing up alongside the people of Ukraine. It's about standing up for the British people, defending ourselves against the corruption that flows through our system, making sure that our houses, our homes, are not being exploited to pay murderers on behalf of a dictator. This is not a foreign problem. This is a problem for the United Kingdom to deal with at home. And the strongest thing we can do to defend Ukraine is to defend ourselves against filth and corruption in our city.
Well, my honourable friend is right in the work that the Foreign Affairs Select Committee has done to champion this issue. This is why we are introducing a much tougher sanctions regime on Russia. And as I've said, we will be bringing forward the economic crime bill to add to the work we're already doing to tackle illicit finance.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful also for sight of the statement, and we would support it. I've already said that in this House that the SNP will be part of the coalition to defend Ukraine and indeed our democracy. So it's not a blank cheque, because we will want to see some details, but you can rest assured, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the SNP will stand behind these measures. I'd be particularly grateful, though, for a reassurance that Scottish limited partnerships will be included within the package, because they are a clear risk in terms of dubious transactions. Also, that property transactions need to be part of it as well, and a reassurance of coordination with the EU precisely to avoid asset flight, given that these measures have been telegraphed. But as well, and I do want an answer to this one, I've pledged the SNP's support for this. I do want a statement from the Foreign Secretary in response to Pippa Crerar, who's the political editor of the Daily Mirror's report today, an impeccable journalist with impeccable sources, that there was supposed to be a call between the Prime Minister and President Putin today. But, and I quote here, when the Grey report landed, the Russians were asked to shift the time, but they couldn't, so it's off. What in the name of hell impression does that give to our friends and our allies? If it's true, perhaps it's not. I'd be grateful for an assurance that it's not true. And if it is true, I'd be grateful for an assurance that that conversation will take place. Thank you.
Foreign Secretary.
I can reassure the honourable gentleman that absolutely nothing is off the table in terms of who and which organisations we will target with these sanctions. We're very committed to working with our partners, including the EU, and we had a big discussion at the G7 in Liverpool about the sanctions regime. I've had discussions since then with Joseph Borrell and my EU counterparts to make sure we're fully coordinated, as well as with the US. And the Prime Minister will shortly be speaking to President Putin. And as I've said, I will be travelling to Moscow in the next fortnight to speak to my counterpart, Sergei Lavrov.
Sorry, Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Cutting out a cancer is both painful and dangerous. Is the Foreign Secretary aware that the previous Intelligence and Security Committee, in its Russia report, drew upon the expertise of Edward Lucas, who today has a comment column in the Times headed, "Britain has become addicted to dirty money"? May I suggest that if she wants to be sure that this cancer is indeed going to be cut out of the body politic and the wider country's economy, she could do far worse than to consult Mr. Lucas before she finalises her proposed sanctions and their structures?
Secretary.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his suggestion. I'd be very happy to meet the gentleman he mentions.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The government said 6 months ago that it was finalising its report into how more than 700 Russian millionaires were fast-tracked for British residency via its so-called golden visa scheme. Can the Foreign Secretary tell the House when this long overdue report is going to be published? And does she agree with me that the reason for the delay relates directly to the £4 million that's been donated to the Conservative Party by 7 individuals who have deep and highly dubious links to the Kremlin?
The exact
Secretary.
We are reviewing the Tier 1 visas that were granted before the 5th of April, and I'm sure the Home Secretary will have further to say about that in due course.
Tobias Ellwood.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, could I welcome both the statement and the wider steps the UK is taking to support Ukraine? My concern is that Western tactical responses are actually playing into Putin's own strategy. Seeking meetings with Putin, for example, actually plays to his self-importance. Any sanctions actioned will drive Russia ever closer to China, exactly what Putin wants to do. And sending NATO reinforcements around Ukraine, but not in it, is not the way to deter an attack. I worry that we are missing the bigger picture. Putin is using this Ukraine crisis to geopolitically realign Russia militarily, economically, and geopolitically with China, with massive security implications for the West. Would my right honourable friend agree the only way to halt an invasion and check this dangerous trajectory is to support Ukraine militarily? This is our Cuban Missile Crisis. I encourage Britain to lead the call to deploy an offensive alliance and stand up to Putin's aggression.
Foreign Secretary.
Our approach in dealing with this issue of Russian aggression is both deterrence and diplomacy. That's why the UK has been at the forefront in supplying defensive weapons to Ukraine, in training up Ukrainian forces, and working with our allies, many of whom are also supplying defensive support into Ukraine. But we have to be clear that there is a difference between a member of NATO who does have a security guarantee, such as Baltic states like Estonia, where UK troops are in place, and the situation in Ukraine. And in my view, the best way of deterring Vladimir Putin from an invasion of Ukraine is, first of all, making it very clear that this will not be simple or easy. This is likely to result in a quagmire, as we have seen in the Soviet-Afghan war, or indeed in Chechnya. And secondly, that there will be severe economic consequences. And those severe economic consequences are, of course, sanctions that target oligarchs and target companies close to Vladimir Putin, but also the not going ahead of Nord Stream 2, I also think is very important from the Russian point of view. But it is important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we do talk to Russia and we do communicate these messages. We will not resile from our position about the protection of the open door policy into NATO, but we will communicate direct with Russia so they understand those messages.
Kevan Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary comes to the House and talks tough and says that there is a readiness to act. It's 4 years now since the Foreign Affairs Committee produced its Russia Gold report, which outlined corruption in the UK. It's 2 years since the Intelligence Security Committee published its report into Russia, which outlined similar concerns. Why has the government not acted in those years? And can I ask her, if we are going to implement sanctions, how can we believe that will be effective without a strong political will and determination to actually make them work?
Great.
Well, we have taken a number of measures in recent years, namely the Criminal Finances Act 2017, the review we're conducting of visas. And what I'm saying is that the most far-reaching sanctions regime will be in place by the 10th of February, making sure that Russia understands that there is a severe package ready to be in place. And of course, I am absolutely prepared to do what is necessary to make those costs severe.
John Whittingdale.
My right honourable friend is right that our argument is with President Putin and his cronies and not with the Russian people. But she will be aware that Russian citizens, and indeed many in eastern Ukraine, are able only to access Russian propaganda from state-owned or oligarch-owned media channels, while independent journalists are put into prison and the internet is censored. Will she look to see what more can be done, perhaps through the BBC World Service and the tech platforms, to ensure that the Russian people are able to access objective and factual reporting?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, my right honourable friend makes an excellent point. And of course, we're looking at all of the channels we can communicate through directly to the Russian people as well as to the Russian government. And that is something that I will be looking to do on my visit to Russia when I go there.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is just weak.
Yeah, it is.
Honestly, since 2010, when the Conservatives came to power and they first started saying they wanted to press the reset button with Putin, we have been weak, ambivalent and vacillating towards the Russian Federation. And we have no quarrel with the Russian people. It is with President Putin. It doesn't work to try to look tough when you've refused to deal with the issue of Tier 1 visas. It's shocking that the Foreign Secretary doesn't even have a proper answer to that question this afternoon. Right. This has been going on for ages. We've been giving them out to thousands of Russian oligarchs. She still hasn't got an answer, or I hope maybe she will have an answer now, to the question about unexplained wealth orders. If we can't do them, how is this new legislation going to make any difference? This is far, far too late. It's not a question of the horse has bolted. They've invited the horse in, sat it down at the table, and given it plenty to eat.
Foreign Secretary.
I suggest the honourable gentleman that he goes to Ukraine and asks the Ukrainian government which of their allies do they think is giving them the most support. The answer is the United Kingdom has supplied more defensive weapons to Ukraine than any of our other NATO allies.
Order. Foreign Secretary, one moment, please. The question's been asked. Let's hear the answer. Foreign Secretary.
The answer, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the Ukrainian government are very grateful for the support the United Kingdom is given. And we are the largest supplier of all of the European NATO allies of defensive weapons to Ukraine. We have helped train up the Ukrainian forces. We're providing economic support, and the sanctions package that I am announcing today goes far further than the EU sanctions regime that the honourable gentleman presumably supports.
Dr. Liam Fox.
I very much welcome what my right honourable friend has said today, and it's quite understandable and right that our focus is currently on Ukraine. But isn't this just part of a bigger picture? What we have is a Russia that is trying to build an arc of instability around NATO, from the Arctic through the Baltic to the Balkans and the Caucasus. And doesn't this require a sustained and consistent and strong policy of deterrence, utilising diplomatic and economic and military elements? And wouldn't a good start be that all those who are members of NATO carry their fair share of the defence spending burden?
Yeah, like Germany.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and that is why the UK is supplying support right from the high north through to the Baltics, through to the Black Sea, backing up NATO and being the largest defence spender of all of the European NATO allies. And that is being recognised, contrary to what those on the opposition benches say. That is being recognised by our allies in the Baltic, by our allies in Eastern Europe, and by our allies in Ukraine.
Mark Pritchard. Oh, sorry, Mark, you have to wait one moment. I was caught up in the moment. Leila Moran.
Mr. Deputy Speaker. We can't sanction what we can't see. And while I welcome this statement, what I'd like some clarity on is whether or not this new legislation overseas entities, because the Foreign Secretary will know that many of these oligarchs hide their money, particularly in UK property. The press release from the FCDO says that it's going to leave them nowhere to hide. Or is this hole finally going to be closed?
Good question.
What the legislation we are putting forward is about being able to target entities and individuals that are of strategic or economic interest to Russian state. So it's broadening it out much more widely than before, where we would only be able to apply sanctions to those who are actively destabilizing Ukraine. So this is, we can target asset freezing, we can target the ability to enter the UK of those individuals and entities. The register of interest she's talking about is part of the economic crime bill. That is something being brought forward by the Treasury, and the Prime Minister is committed that that will happen this year.
Mr. Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Oh, sorry, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We're both at it. I apologise. So, can I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement today and the announcement of new powers? Long overdue, but I'm glad it's this government that's delivering and delivering by the 10th of February. Can I say to her that this will also be welcomed by the Rada in Kiev and also by the government of Ukraine? Is it not the case that Ukraine is not NATO's border, it is not the EU's border, but it is democracy's border, and that is why Ukraine matters? And can I thank her for her good offices, working hard, galvanizing opinion both in Washington and across EU capitals to ensure that we have that strong defence, strong deterrence, and strong diplomacy?
Well, first of all, can I thank my honourable friend for his work as chair of the all-party Ukraine group. Ukraine is vitally important. It is a freedom-loving democracy in Europe. And if we don't work hard, which we are, to defend Ukraine from Russian aggression, that will simply encourage aggressors around the world. This is not just a regional security issue, important though this is, it's a global security issue.
I'm grateful, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Like my honourable friend, I support much of what's in the statement, and the statement says that she won't name who or what may be targeted with sanctions, but can she clarify that whatever the new legislation looks like, it will enable the government to take action against Kremlin mouthpieces and outlets in this country, for example, RT UK.
Well, as I've said, I am not going to talk about the individuals or entities that could be targeted, but it will be anyone who is of strategic interest to the Russian state or economic interest to the Russian state. And you can imagine that is quite a broad list of people and entities.
Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend will know very well that Kiev was the original capital of Rus and was an area of fabulous wealth and education until invaded by the Khans, and the Russians and the Rusians called them the Tartars. Now, there's many reports have come out of tens of thousands of Tartars have disappeared from Crimea. And this human rights atrocity is not being able to be properly investigated. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that we must try and find out exactly what has been happening to the Tartar population? And equally, for those who do not feel it is important, or we should somehow let Russia have the Russian Empire, as President Putin outlined in his essay last year, that goes against every principle of freedom and democracy, of standing up to fascist governments who want to ethnically cleanse people over centuries of hatred.
My honourable friend is completely right. And let's remember that Russia actually signed up to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity in the 1994 Budapest Agreement. They signed up to this. And what they are seeking to do is renege on their commitments to stoke aggression and to seek to undermine Ukrainian democracy in a variety of ways, whether it's false flag operations, whether it's cyber attacks, or whether it's trying to install puppet regimes in Kiev.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. A few minutes ago, the Prime Minister stood at that dispatch box and said, in response to questions on Partygate, and I quote, "This is the government which is bringing countries together to stand up against Putin." But just last week, our closest allies said they went public with their concerns over Russian influence in this country. So will the Secretary of State admit that her government has undermined our diplomatic status and our national security by refusing for so long to take seriously Russian influence and dirty money?
I don't accept the honourable lady's talking down of the UK role. It was at the G7 meeting in Liverpool that we agreed with our allies, including the United States, including the EU, and including Japan, that the Russian regime would face severe consequences on an incursion with Ukraine. And that language has now been adopted by all of our allies and partners. We've led the way in providing defensive weaponry to Ukraine. We've led the way, as we are today, with our package of economic sanctions, which goes beyond what we were able to do as a member of the EU.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. The time for deterrence diplomacy is now. Over the last 2 weeks, from Kramatorsk to Donetsk, from Kiev to Sarajevo and Mostar, civilians have been clear with me that they believe the West will either save them or there will be bloodshed in Europe. What consideration is my right honourable friend given to blacklisting Russian banks? And will she look at joining the US in sanctioning Milorad Dodik in Bosnia, whose ethno-nationalist, separatist, genocide-denying agitation also risks bringing bloodshed to Europe?
Well, I know my honourable friend has recently been on a visit to the Western Balkans, and we are absolutely looking at what more we can do on sanctions to the regime there, as well as how we target some of the Russian entities she talked about.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, any war on the borders between Ukraine and Russia will be utterly disastrous for the people of Ukraine, the people of Russia, and the future of peace across the whole of the continent of Europe. So when she travels to Moscow to have discussions with the Russian government, I hope she'll be able to reassert the agreements reached in the 1990s in recognizing Ukrainian independence. But will she also try and take the whole thing a stage further and a new disarmament agreement with Russia, revisiting the previous agreements And will she ensure that the British government, the British state, is represented at the Vienna Convention on Nuclear Weapons in the middle of March as a way of taking forward de-escalation of stress and threats, as a way of winding down the tensions on the border? Because if we carry on building up massive troops on both sides of the border, something awful is going to happen, and it will be very hard to get out of it.
Let's be clear here, it's the Russian regime that have amassed the tanks and troops on the Ukrainian border. It is the Russian regime that have escalated aggression, not just towards Ukraine, but also through Belarus and in the Western Balkans. And it's the Russian regime that needs to step back before they end up entering into what could be, and I do agree with the honourable gentleman on that point, a very serious quagmire with appalling consequences for the people of both Ukraine and Russia. And that is the point I will be making when I travel to Moscow in the next fortnight.
Bob Seeley.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State for her very robust approach. And this is not a criticism of her, but we still lack a comprehensive and coherent approach to dealing with Russia's hybrid war. This is frankly a decade too late, so no criticism of her, and clearly deterrence isn't working. My question is on UK facilitators, which has been mentioned by a few other people. Does she understand how corrosive it is to have young UK service personnel, ordinary kids in uniform, in forward position in the Baltics, whilst a morally vacant and corrupted class in London of lawyers, bankers, reputation launderers, and compromat-style private investigators coin it, serving the needs of a parasitic, murderous oligarch class who are part of a neo-fascist regime now threatening war in Europe? What are we doing about this corrupt facilitator class?
Well, as I outlined earlier, we have taken action against illicit finance and corruption. We've established the National Cyber Security Centre. We're working very hard to support Ukraine on the cyber attacks they're facing from the Russian regime. And what I've announced today is a sanctions regime, which is by far the toughest sanctions regime that we've ever had against Russia.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary's announcement today shows that the government can act very speedily when it wants to. These measures will be on the statute book by the 10th of February. Can she therefore explain to the House why we are still waiting for all of the other measures that my right honourable friend, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, referred to in his response to the statement? Why can't those be acted on as speedily as the sanctions she's announced to the House today?
Well, as I said, we have put through the Criminal Finances Act 2017, our global anti-corruption sanctions regime. We're reviewing the Tier 1 visas, and we will introduce the Economic Crime Bill, which is something that Her Majesty's Treasury is working on.
Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary is absolutely correct in highlighting that our partners in Central and Eastern Europe, Poland and the Baltic states, recognise the leadership that Britain is providing with regards to these new tensions, but they also recognise the increasing divergence between London and Berlin in terms of how to tackle Russia over these nefarious behaviour. Will she agree with me that it's important now to go back to our German partners and re-emphasize the need for them to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline? It gives the Russians an umbilical cord to the heart of Europe. We import less than 1.5% of our gas requirements from Russia. The Germans import over 60% of their energy requirements from Moscow.
I had a discussion with my colleague, Foreign Minister Baerbock, last week about precisely this issue, and I do welcome the statements from her and Chancellor Stolz on Nord Stream 2, being very clear that it won't go ahead in the event of a Russian incursion. We do need to reduce dependence on Russian gas. I welcome the work the United States is doing to look at how supplies can be augmented. We're working with partners across the Middle East. This is a strategic issue for Europe, and we do need to reduce dependence on Russian gas. There's no doubt about it.
Anna McMurran.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Over £4 million has been donated to Tory MPs, including to a quarter of the current cabinet by Russian-linked individuals. Dirty money. Is this what? And this is from an evil regime. Is this why the government has so far failed to take the Russian threat to our democracy so seriously? And how will what's announced today help? And also, will she pledge to this House to fly at least business class to Moscow in the next couple of weeks, instead of using £500,000 of taxpayers' money, as she did when she flew to Australia?
We have government planes for a reason. It's for government ministers to use on government business.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In addition to targeted sanctions against Kremlin-linked individuals, our friends and allies in the US Senate are considering 3 further steps. One would be to sanction Russian state banks to prevent the flow of foreign capital. Secondly, would be to have export controls on key technologies that are useful to the Kremlin. And thirdly, a number of senators led by Ted Cruz in the US Senate are proposing a return to sanctions against Nord Stream itself and related entities and individuals linked to the organisation. Will each of those be included in the bill that she intends to bring forwards?
Well, as I've said, the legislation we're bringing forward is very wide-ranging and targets a number of sectors and interests in relation to the Kremlin. And I can assure my honourable friend that nothing is off the table.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Our American allies have just issued an unprecedented rebuke to the British government, saying that any new sanctions will be worthless as long as London remains the main international laundromat for dirty Russian money. And I remember this Prime Minister tried to stop the publication of the Russia report and remove the whip from the right honourable gentleman who now chairs the Intelligence and Security Committee when his own patsy candidate failed to get the job. I'm still not clear, though, whether she is reinstating the economic crime bill, because that's not been said on the record from the dispatch box before. If she is, can the Admirable Lord Agnew have his job back, please?
So, as I have said already this afternoon, we remain committed to bringing in the economic crime bill, and the Prime Minister committed that would be done this year.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The right honourable friend from North Somerset rather took my thunder, but it's such an important point I'd like to raise it if I can reiterate it. If ever there was a reason to take a fresh look at NATO and its role and responsibilities, this threat by Russia of invasion in Europe must be it. Can my right honourable friend tell us, are the other NATO countries that are not spending 2%, has she spoken to them? Has she given the reassurance that they will spend 2%? And if they haven't, what does she intend to do to make them spend 2% of their GDP?
We are already spending more than 2% of our GDP. We're the largest European NATO supplier of troops and security around Europe. And we want to see others step up, because as the honourable gentleman says, these threats are getting worse. We've seen an increase in aggression, and we need to see all NATO allies step up and fulfil their commitments.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The government's attempt to claim some kind of moral high ground on the issue of Russian sanctions is sheer hypocrisy when her party has accepted donations from oligarchs, her government has turned a blind eye to Kremlin meddling in our democracy and has held open the door to Putin's cronies to have their money laundered in London. So can she tell us whether that is the reason that there is still this delay when it comes to the promised register of overseas entities to shine a light on Russian ownership of British property? In her replies both to the honourable member for Exeter and indeed for Oxford West and Abingdon, she showed a remarkable lack of urgency to know that this economic crimes bill might come sometime this year, is not good enough when we're talking about what pressure can be brought to bear on Russia now.
Well, I hoped the Honourable Lady would welcome the fact that we are introducing our toughest ever sanction regime on Russia, which will be in place by the 10th of February. We are acting with urgency to deal with this crisis.
Rick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the actions my right honourable friend is taking. There should indeed be nobody who thinks they are safe from sanctions. So can the Foreign Secretary confirm that this new legislation will ensure that any company of interest to the Kremlin would be able to be targeted so that there can be nowhere to hide for Putin's oligarchs?
We will be able to target any company that is linked to the Russian state, engages in business in economic significance to the Russian state, or in a sector of strategic significance. And we won't just be able to target those entities, we'll be able to go after those who own or control them. So the net is very wide.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm going to give the Foreign Secretary a third chance. Does she agree that the UK government will continue to look weak on the Russian threat while Tory MPs and members of the other house continue to accept cash from Russian-linked individuals?
Well, I had hoped the Honourable Lady would be welcoming the package of tough sanctions we're introducing.
One other item